Hey guys, how y'all doing? Let me just make sure that I'm up and running. Yes, I am. So there hasn't been anything really that dramatic going on, except for that there was a recent blow up on xitter that I thought was rather fascinating, and it actually made me think of the stream that I did a while back, where we talked about the way that the workforce was getting automated, and it was almost like a rising lava pool, and it's like you keep having to hop up the steps in terms of cognitive ability and utilizing it in order to escape basically being made access to requirements. And as time goes on, that lava pool keeps creeping up and up and up. And now we're at the point where we're starting to see the white-collar jobs getting touched by that lava pool. And you're starting to see a real pushback and a real reaction for it. So I wanted to talk primarily about that, but there's a few other things as well. Let me just read a little bit, catch up on the the live chat here. Discussion of homeless people YouTubers would be interesting. Yeah, actually, I actually have a few screenshots of the videos that are being made, because it really is a phenomenon where you'll see like somebody do like a actually, let me see if I can hold on. I'm going to pull this up. Just 1 second here, because I have some screenshots I took of because I would constantly get these videos recommended to me on YouTube, and it would be like, I'm 26 and my life is over. Basically, I'm gonna rope, that sort of stuff. Let me see here. And here we are. All right. Let me pull this up. Hang on just 1 second, though. Please let me in the Discord server for free. I'm a broke cell. Actually, Bilal, I am starting a wagey finally. I was able to find one. So, like, okay, admittedly, like, one of the reasons why I pay gated my Discord server, in addition to filtering for, people that are willing to follow the rules and not just casually break them because there's no consequence. Like, part of the reason for the pay gate is to, so that people, even if they throw like $2 in, it still is like money that you think, well, since I've already invested it, there's like a sunk cost fallacy. I'm going to follow the rules and not get kicked out. But in addition to that, I mean, it also helped that I was at various times kind of cash strapped. So getting some super chats and stuff was sort of a nice way to make ends meet a little bit. It wasn't much, but it was a little bit. Now that I'm finally starting a proper full-time job, I won't need to worry so much about that. So I'm going to switch the policy a little bit. So, yeah, it would be... well, I'll tell you what, Gultist. Like, I was a little bit annoyed at the time, but I'll let you back in if you don't. Like, we've disabled camera streaming. As long as you don't camera stream anymore, I could let you back in. That's the only issue, though. But yeah. Anyways, I'm gonna switch the requirement to, if there's somebody that is friends with you and that can vet you so that they can vouch that you're a legit person. Like, if you're a complete stranger, like if you have no connections to anyone on my server, the pay gate is still there. But if you do have connections to people on my server and they can vouch for you, and I've known them long enough that I trust them, that's another way you can get in. You just have to message me, and if you have those connections and they say you're legit, that's good. That's the bottom line, really. Anyways, here, let me pull up what I was talking about here. So I get shit like, hang on. You see a lot of stuff like this. Like, I'm 26 and my life sucks. And, oh yeah, the Steve Hoka did not, I don't know, look, I like Steve Hoka. I like talking to him. But he is a little eccentric with how he does his streams. Listen, it's his stream, so it's entirely up to him whether he wants to keep it private or not. Maybe he felt that there was a little bit too much edgy talk in it, so he's a little worried about it, like that there's content on there that could be reported, in which case I think that's fine. Though I would like to have him allow me access to the stream just so I can download it and I can get my own stuff off of it, because there's clippable stuff on there. I think that's pretty good. And yeah, Gultist, we weren't very clear about the rules. So I've actually made the rules a little more concrete and consistent. But yeah. Anyways, there's a lot of videos of these guys here. They're like, I'm 26, my life sucks. Let's see what else we got. We got like this guy here, or this void here rather. I'm 34, single, jobless, and always alone. Oh, the horror. And what you realize is that, like, look at that, 300,000 views. This guy here. I wasted my 20s, 35-year-old loser. And he's at 102K views. Another one here. Gen Z bum epidemic. It's like an instant way to get like 30,000 views on your video, is just to talk about how much you suck. And I think to a significant extent, I think that this is a sign of where things are, because people are obviously resonating with this to some extent, right? But the catch, of course, is that you have to be reasonably attractive, which is exactly there's the irony, right? You can't do this if you're some chopped dude. If you're like some fat, ugly dude, like even the rice cell was pretty good looking for a rice. And the white guys are good looking. Like this one's a perfect example right here. Like this chick looks like she should be in Dubai or something with the baboon lips and whatever. But it's obvious that this is like a trend in order to attract viewership, right? But what that does tell you is that there is a demand for this sort of stuff. Like people do feel this way, and they feel like it's validating them to see this kind of content. You know, and of course, obviously, there is the halo effect that goes into this. Being an attractive person, especially an attractive woman, doing this kind of content, you're going to get instantly far more attention than if you're just some random dude, you know? Like, we got 81K views. Let me see what else we got. I think that's all I did for screen caps, but that was like 4 or 5 videos. And this has been a while now. This has been like over a year that they've been posting videos like this. And my impression is that this trend is only going to continue. And it brings to mind what I wanted to talk about, which was this video right here. Okay, we're going to play it, and I'm going to mute myself.
Stop buying coffee for $5.50. I can walk around with anybody for a day and show you that they're wasting 15% of their money, sometimes 20. Stupid stuff. You know, you go to work, you spend $15 on a sandwich. What are you, an idiot? It costs you 99 cents to make a sandwich at home and bring it with you. So what if you bring it with you? Bring your own water if you have to, or your own drink, or bring your own coffee mug. You start to add that up every day, it's a ton of money. Most people, particularly working in metropolitan cities that are just starting out on their job, making their first $60,000, piss away about $15,000 a year on stupid stuff. And that's what they should stop doing. Stop buying coffee.
Okay, so this kick started a firestorm. And you can see in the quotes, it was just like one after another. These people are unbelievable. Holy shit, what's going on? And it created this giant dialectic. And it was quite annoying because most people miss the point. Okay, the point that, like, what was really important here is that they're using this sort of rhetoric, like the boomers, and not just boomers actually as a group. Though boomers reinforce it, but the people that are pushing this rhetoric are guys like Kevin O'Leary, who, if you know anything about him, he's a Canadian. I think he's like some kind of billionaire. I remember him from the Shark's Den or something. He was like the one token Canadian on there. So he's like our Donald Trump in a weird way, I guess. It's actually funny because I believe his father's Irish and his mother is Lebanese. So genetically, he's probably pretty close to Jews. Come to think of it, Ashkenazi Jews. If you think about it, genetically speaking, that's probably. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. But the issue is that he's pushing this in order to mask the declining standard of living, like the downward mobility that this entire generation is facing. And well, millennials have faced it, but Zoomers especially. Zoomers are getting hit much harder than millennials, I would say. Like, I can tell you, like, if I knew now, or if I knew back in like 2014 what I know now, or 2016, I would be making drastically different decisions because the impression I had at that time, like you could work a wagey job, like not even like a skilled job or whatever, like a white collar. You could work a wagey job, and you could afford your own apartment on your own, which seems insane now. Now it wouldn't be like a fancy apartment. Like I was in a fairly cheap place, but it was still an apartment on my own. And I was able to afford that working 40 hours a week at, I think at the time I was working at a call center. And yeah, like it was not difficult at all. And I didn't really think too much about the money I was making or spending because I thought, things are just going to continue to improve, right? Like that was the impression. Or at least they would stay the same. And you think, well, this is the wiggle room I have in this current economy. Okay, I'll chart a path through here. Like, my thinking at the time was, I'm going to get these certifications in IT, and I'll work in IT for a while. And while I'm working in IT, I'll save up money so I can go to university to get into computer science at the time. That's what I was thinking at the time. And then I'd have a background on the IT side to start with, and then I could use that to transition into computer science in a more with a stronger understanding of like the hardware side of the technology than just somebody that went straight into CS. That was my thinking when I was in my early 20s. And of course that didn't happen that way because the economy fell off a cliff after 2013, 2014, 2015. Like everything started to decline consistently after that point. And Zoomers now, coming into the economy now, it's almost like I had never thought that things were good for me. Like I had never thought that the economy was good at that time. But in comparison, it's so much better than what it was, it feels ridiculous to say that, but it's true. Right? Yeah, I know, call center. I knew you were Indian. Exactly. Well, that's actually where I acquired that fake Indian accent because there were so many fucking Indians that would call in from Brampton, Surrey, Laval. So it's Surrey, BC, Brampton, Ontario, Laval, Quebec. Those were the three curry hotspots. Wherever you'd see Balpreets and Manjeets, that's exactly where they were from. And as soon as you'd see a Manjeet Singh or an Aurora or Dhaliwal was calling in, you knew that it was going to be a long-ass call, and they were going to spend an hour haggling like 50 cents off their price plan. Or like trying to get like a $10 fee waived. And they would spend over an hour on this. And you'd think, okay, so they get the victory, I guess, for managing to get a discount. But with the amount of time and energy that goes into this, was it even worth it? Yeah, it was ridiculous. But yeah, I can tell you that now Zoomers coming into this thing, they're much worse off. And this is something that I find really difficult to understand with boomers. Boomers seem to have this really hard time accepting that things are objectively worse than they were when they were growing up. Because I've had this conversation many times with my mother. I mean, my father died in 2015, so actually before I even had the conception of if things were better or worse, he was already gone. Long story behind that. He didn't die suddenly. He died of old age, but, well, not exactly, but like age-related illness. But with my mother, I've had this conversation several times where I was trying to explain, like, this is the economic situation that young people are dealing with now. And she would be like, well, when I was in my 20s, I was in an apartment with a roommate and we were just barely making ends meet. And no. It'd be the same shit. right? Now, to be fair, Canada did go through an economic recession in the 90s for a protracted while. It was pretty bad, but we recovered by like 2000 or something. We recovered. So it's not like it was a permanent thing. Whereas it's been consistent over a decade now of decline. Like they just don't accept it. They don't accept the explanation. Whereas in my case, as I said, like I just explained to you, when I look at guys that are like 22 that are coming up now, I can sit down and talk to them and say, listen, shit is way harder now than it is when I was your age. And I would explain, like, I wish, on the one hand, I wish that I had the access to information that you guys have now. Like, this is another thing that I've explained to Zoomers. One advantage that you do have is that you have access to people that have a lot more advanced information than what we had access to. So, like, for example, you could talk to guys that are in their 30s or 40s in like a Discord server, and they can explain to you how the property market works. Okay, when my father died, there was a house that was worth about $400,000-$500,000 at the time that should have gone to me, but my sisters intervened in the will and ended up, one of my sisters got power of attorney, or whatever the term is for control of the will, and she basically sold off the house and divided the assets, the material assets. That was an incredibly stupid thing to do. And if I had known about the property market, how it worked in Canada at that time, compared to what I know now, I would have prevented this. But I was, at the time, even though I was 23, 24, something around there, I just didn't have access to that information. I didn't understand how the property market worked. So I just sort of allowed things to go as they were. Now I'm talking to 20-year-olds and I'm explaining how the system works to 20-year-olds, and they're getting this information now. Now, that's one advantage that Zoomers have. It's one advantage. Everything else, like the actual scale of difficulty, is far, far harder. Markets are way more efficient now than they were in like 2012, 2013. Right? Nowadays, it's not only that you have to deal with online advertising for positions, for example, but the borders are way fuzzier than they used to be. There's so many people that are coming in. Like I was reading this Canadian jobs market subreddit, and there was this recruiter that was talking about how Indeed, which I'm sure you guys know of, Indeed.com, whatever. Most employers, they'll post job advertisements on Indeed, but they don't actually look at applicants that apply through Indeed, because they get so many international applicants that they end up screening out 90% of them anyways. And this is sort of what we have to deal with now, is that there's the labor market is so much more mobile internationally now than it was even 10 years ago. That it's a completely different ball game. And it was legit advice to tell a millennial, get like a STEM degree, like get even like an engineering degree, like electrical engineering degree, and you'll have a job waiting for you. Because at that time that was correct, but now, and you can't even blame them, right? Like if you're like some guy from Peru or some guy from India or whatever, and you see how Americans are enjoying this like really in-demand job market and these high wages, you're going to do everything you can to get into that market. And the employers also want you to get into that market because they want to reduce those costs. So like in every other way, Zoomers are in a more competitive, much more intensely competitive market, I would say, than millennials had to deal with. And I think a lot of millennials are kind of fucked because we were used to a less competitive market. So you're seeing like millennials that they get laid off now, and they're completely screwed when it comes to trying to get into industries now because they're so far behind in terms of their skill set or their capacity to rapidly learn. Some of that's age related, but I think a lot of it is just they were used to a much easier setup. It's kind of like dudes that have been in relationships for 10 years or so, and then they get out of a relationship at 35 or something, and they realize, holy crap, like my options are way slimmer than I thought they were, you know? Boomers live life on tutorial mode, Gen X live life on easy mode, millennials live life on more normal mode, Zoomers live life on hard mode. I'd say it's pretty true. I would say that the big divide, you can make it. Maybe this is self-serving because I'm including myself in this, but I think the big divide is if you were graduated university before or after 2008, or not even university. You could even include high school. Because pre-2008 financial crisis, there was a lot of loose money, easy money in the system. And easy money means more risk is permitted in the system. More risk means you're more willing to hire on suboptimal options, right? You're more willing to invest in potentially suboptimal businesses, stuff like that. And you can even see this effect on media, for example. Like, I think I was talking about it like 2 or 3 streams ago, where you could notice with anime, like the quality, or not the quality, rather, the creativity dropping off quite dramatically after 2008, as the market becomes as the market loses investor money, and anime creators have to be more formulaic. Like, they need more predictable series and shows in order to generate a predictable revenue for investors, because investors will not invest in something that isn't guaranteed to produce a certain revenue. You know, you can't really have an experimental or maybe more complex, a deeper plot to your whatever you're producing, because maybe it'll be like a cult hit with certain people. Like, it'll be like an Evangelion style cult hit in 20 years or whatever. And like, there's a lot of smart people that find it really deep and satisfying. But if you're not selling merch on that, investors aren't going to invest in that. You know, like, the only exception to this is Studio Ghibli. And they're riding largely on already having all the notoriety that they have. No one else is producing anything really that creative, you know? And that's entirely because the market doesn't permit it. And it's the same that goes for everything else, you know? Like, are you going to take a risk on a guy who's maybe suboptimal in terms of his marks? Maybe he's not as conscientious, you know, so there's a risk that he could not be as productive, but he's really creative. And so he could, like, come up with ideas that really revolutionize your business. But that's not a guarantee. Well, if you're in a tight monetary situation, all you really want is to keep producing product and to keep reproducing the same outcome. So you're naturally going to go for the safest bet, and that's going to be people with experience, people that have the strongest credentials, that show that they're as much of a what's the term I'm looking for? Like a wagey as you can possibly find. They're going to do the most consistent and hardest work. That's who you're going to go for. Ask Copel what happened to this stream. What you did with him. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get a hold of him because he doesn't really have socials, right? I mean, I'm a little bit guilty of that as well, because sometimes I'll take a while to respond to things that are sent to me. But he's actually quite difficult to get a hold of. It is weird, though, because I remember he posted something about how, oh, I'm really sick, that's why I couldn't unprivate my stream, I'll private it in a day, and then he never actually did. It's very strange. I don't know. It's just annoying because, I mean, okay, like, the next time that we do a stream, I'm just going to record it on my end so that I have a copy of it, so that I don't end up, like, having a lot of, like, 5 hours, I think that stream was. And there was a ton of stuff that's clippable, and it's all gone because it's behind the private wall, which is kind of annoying. But, you know, Mercer, what's your thoughts on the belief that women have that state that men are lonely because they refuse to grow up? Oh, hang on just one second. The women have that state that men are lonely because they refuse to grow up. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that. When you say that, do you mean like men are like Peter Pan syndrome or something? Is that what you mean? Because Peter Pan syndrome, it's a symptom though. It's not, it's not a like. There's a video actually that I was gonna watch, but I didn't find it very satisfying because he was talking about like what causes Peter Pan syndrome, and there were some interesting ideas that he had, but then well, actually, you know what? Maybe we will watch it. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. Actually, hold on. So there's this video that a guy did, and he was sort of talking about like Peter Pan syndrome and dog moms and whatever. And he was saying like there's a structural cause for it. It's due to boomers basically pricing people out. And there's truth to it. But then he also kind of oversimplified a lot of things because he would talk about how Houston is a booming town and whatever. And Houston's not a booming town. Houston's full of fucking Indians. Like, no... Nobody wants to live in Houston because it's full of Jeets. They've overwhelmed because these are all the H-1Bs, right? And like these Republican states, they make themselves ground zero for these H-1B hubs. And then these H-1Bs just buy up all the property and price the locals out. And that's immediately what's happening right now in Austin. Let me see if I can find it actually, because I did. Let me see. Maybe I'll just Google it because I can't find it. I thought I had a copy of it here. But, oh, maybe, hang on, view. Yeah. Peter Pan. It was this rice cell that did it too. They don't grow up as in they get coddled by their mom. I don't think that actually happens. Like, okay, there's certain cultures where that happens, but they're not European cultures. If anything, actually, one of the things that I've really found satisfying that has been talked about on the xitter sphere is how like there's this big divide between how boomer men treat their daughters versus their sons. And so for their daughters, they will roll out the red carpet. They will make life as easy for them as possible. If anything happens to them, like in terms of being displaced economically, there's all these demands to do something about it and solve it. And there's this realization that like boomer men have this quasi-sexual, it's almost like a transference. Well, at least this is one of the theories, that there's this transference of boomer men where it's almost like they want to poke their daughters, but not exactly. Somebody put it clearly. It's like this is basically the daughter is like a copy of his wife, but actually does love him. And as a result, boomer dads become like super simps for their daughters. And then on top of that, they become very aggressive against any other man. Now, my contribution to this is that boomer dads that get fixated, or that are daughter dads or whatever. What do they call them? Girl dads. That's it. Girl dads. Boomer men that become girl dads, they become really hostile to young men, because I think if you actually look at how boomers behaved in the 70s and the 80s, they were really kind of gross. Like, you hear all these memes about how, she's 17 years old and 11 months and 29 days. You disgusting animal. How dare you find her attractive? And then if you look at what boomers were watching in the 70s, like the movies that were out, they would be like 13-year-old girls getting passed around like prostitutes. Like, there's some really disgusting shit that was just accepted as normal back then. Like hypersexualizing 13, even 12-year-old, like those kind of ages of girls. And if you look at like the snuggle assault rates that would happen, there was a peak in the 80s and 90s. Like it was rising from the 60s to the 80s and then 90s, and then it started to drop after the 90s. Now, if you know anything about boomers and leaded gasoline, actually, it's not just boomers, it's also Gen X. They were exposed to, actually, here, let me pull it up. Let's see here. This is one of my favorites. One of my favorite charts. You can see there's like a 1-to-1 correlation between leaded gasoline and violent crimes per 100,000 people. Now, a lot of people will point to race. Obviously, there's a big disparity in different races, like we know what's going on there. But even if you look at within race, you still see that there's a big difference between when the boomers were hitting their peak versus older generations, and also Gen X, right? Because if you actually look at leaded gasoline peaking, it actually peaked around 1968, 1969 to 1972. And this is actually Gen X. These aren't boomers. The boomer cutoff, I believe, is 1964. And then it goes from 1965 to 1984 is, I think so. Something like 1965 to is it 1974 or 84? It's something like that. That's Gen X, right? Generally speaking, my understanding is millennials, they tend to be cut off from 1980 or so. Basically, for millennials, you have to be an adult. You have to have been an adult or younger by 2000, because that's why they're called millennials, because they hit adulthood at around 2000. Year 2000. Gen X, they hit adulthood in 1990. That was what made them distinct, right? So for them, it would be like the 70s. And you could see, like, if anything, that brain damage was most severe with Gen X. But it also hit boomers pretty hard, too. And boomer men get off on their daughters being promiscuous and having a high body count like literal cucks. Yes. And you know what else is funny about that? Is that when you see a boomer talk about his daughter, this is something I remember noticing as far back as like 10 years ago. So these aren't even Gen Z girls. These are millennials that they're talking about. Boomer men, if they're talking about their daughter working at like a mechanic place or whatever, they will be like, she's such a hard worker. Everybody loves her. She's out working all the men in that place. She's smarter than all of the men. Whereas when you hear them talking about their sons, he's lazy, he doesn't do anything, he's failing at what he's doing, he could do a lot better. Like, they always denigrate their sons, and they always idealize their daughters. Now, I think part of that is like an inherited thing, because there's this like structural hostility to men since the feminists, I would say, like we tipped over from sort of being middle ground in the 70s and 80s to being like overtly hostile to men by the 90s. And you can even see this with the shows that would come out, right? Like The Simpsons, for example. Like, obviously, The Simpsons, the main story is Homer Simpson's a drooling idiot. His wife Marge is so much smarter than he is, and it's a big joke, right? Like, that's the joke of the series. Same with Family Guy. You know, you could still find these funny. You can find them entertaining, but the bottom line is that the women are smart and the men are stupid. And I think to a large extent this was internalized. And this is sort of reproducing itself, this sort of structural misandry, I guess you could say. And I believe that it gets internalized by the young men themselves. Like, there's this clip of Jared Taylor going around where it's interesting because he's talking to this, let me actually see if I can find it. Hold on. Let's see here. Fuck off. Let me see here. Jared. Let me see here. Where are you? He did this interview where he talked to... here we are. This is what I'm looking for. Okay. Listen to this. I'm going to mute myself. Just a second.
I'm like a white Australian male. White.
Stop right there. You are not a white male. None of this white male stuff. That is for lab rats. You are a white man.
Look, I'm not even trying to get into the racial politics of it, but the important part here is that he's talking about how these men are describing themselves. They don't even want to describe themselves as men. They call themselves white males, and I am guilty of this as well, because in some critical ways you don't even really feel like a man, right? Like what even is the definition of a man now? Like, do we actually map onto it? I'm not so sure. It doesn't feel like it. Like, for me at least, it feels like I never really aged past, mentally, I mean, aged past like 20. Because the things that are supposed to happen after that point, the life goals, the life experiences you're supposed to have after 20 just never occurred. You know? So as a result, you're almost frozen cognitively at 20, and you still don't really think of yourself as, you don't really self-describe as a man because you still feel like a teenager at 20, right? But so it's like your brain is frozen. And actually, there's another thing that's interesting is when you are not experiencing new things in life, like new life events, when you are in a routine, what will happen is your brain will stop forming redundant memories. All right, so you will actually not remember things that are routine over and over again. And as a consequence, this is why it feels like, for example, COVID felt like it was over within, like it felt like it went way faster the time during COVID, those two or 3 years or so, between 2019 and 2021. It felt like that was going way faster than it actually was. And that is because you weren't doing new things. You were locked inside your house, maybe going out to get groceries and then going back to your house. There was no actual change in the scenery. There was no change in your environment. And as a consequence, the time goes faster and faster and faster. And for me, it feels like, I look at, for example, 2026. It feels like January 1st was yesterday to me. Because I remember January 1st, it was like negative 33 degrees Celsius or something. And I remember thinking, holy crap, it's cold. But that was like, but that's almost 6 months ago now. And you realize it's half a year ago. It doesn't feel like half a year, but that's because nothing in my life has changed since then, really, structurally. There's been no new experiences. There's been no new life events. There's no interactions that are meaningful in person between me and other people. And so I've attached no memories in this entire 6-month period. I've formed no new memories to place in my timeline. And as a result, it's almost like when you sleep. You know, when you sleep, you could be sleeping 8 hours, but it doesn't feel like it. Like you might have a dream that lasts like 5 minutes in your head, and then you're awake and you realize 8 hours has passed. It's a very similar concept. It's a very similar concept. When you realize like the timeline gets compressed due to the lack of memory formation. You know, so for me, it's like I blink and then suddenly it's 10 years have gone by and you realize, holy shit, you know, I'm getting gray hair now. And there's no fundamental difference in who I am now versus who I was 10 years ago. Maybe it's increase in knowledge, but like I don't feel any growth. And I think that's what's causing that. White guy in the Jared Taylor video is so good looking. Yeah, he's Australian actually. Chad Australia is real. It's not even a meme. I think I mentioned this before. I grew up with a half Australian kid on my block. He was down the road from me in the same street. And his mother was Australian, and his mother was like 5'8" or something. Or 5'9". And that was, remember, this woman is, I'm a millennial, so her kids are millennials too. So she'd be a boomer, and she was like 5'8", 5'9". Like she was tall, and she was physically sinewy too. Like not like fat or whatever, but like physically she had good muscle insertions. Like she was physically strong. And her sons, she had 2 boys. Her sons were absolute fucking moggers. Like in hindsight, I realize this now. They were both very good looking kids. Blonde hair, blue-eyed, tall, like they're probably over 6'2", both of them, because they were towering over me when I was a kid. And I didn't really get height stunted until I was in my teenage years. Like I would have maxed out around 5'10". So with that proxy in mind, like they would have at least been 6'2". And their mom was tall. Their dad was a Canadian, and he was a little bit of a subhuman, actually. He was like only maybe half an inch taller than her, the Australian woman. And I mean, he was okay looking, but he was kind of thin and lean. So, yeah. Do you think massive racial conflict for power could occur when Canada and US becomes less than 20% male? It's actually a good question. I'm not so sure. I could see that happening, but the problem is, like, I think the reason why nothing has happened is because there's still this very strong sense of legitimacy in the system. You know, this is something that I noticed about how politics works in America. Like, there's this idea that Americans are, like, for example, if Trump wins the White House, suddenly all the Republicans are on his side, and the Democrats are saying that the election is illegitimate, whatever. And then the Democrats win, and you see the reverse. What that actually shows you is not that the political system in America is being delegitimized. It's just that it's like a side thing. It's like they realize that their side is in power. They support the political system. The other guy is in power. They oppose the political system. But the system itself is not being opposed. It's just who's in control of it. Like, Americans still fundamentally believe in their system. Right? If they did not believe in their system, you would see a similar kind of destabilization that you see in Syria or in other like open dictatorships. Now, that may come eventually, but I'm not convinced it's going to come from racial strife. I think long before there's whites are that percentage of the population, you're going to see an economic crisis, and you're going to see people start to split over economic issues. And immigration is an economic issue as well. Right. But I think that the reason why, for example, Indians are much more hated than Africans or Muslims or whatever is because they're so economically threatening. It's not because they commit crimes at a order of magnitude less than, for example, North Africans do in Europe or Black Africans. OK, it's just a fact. Indians are one of the least criminal in terms of actually like violent crime, like real like theft, robbery, that sort of, surprise snuggle. It's just a fact. If you look at the statistics, they are not overrepresented. Okay, they're overrepresented in scamming and in unethical behavior, but that's different. Okay, the reason why they're so hostile, or people are so hostile to them, is because of the economic threat they represent across the border, or across the spectrum, from blue collar all the way up to white collar. They're a full spectrum threat economically. All right. And this makes it so that people can't achieve their life goals. And that's what matters, right? If you compare this to Muslims in Europe, okay, yeah, Muslims in Europe, they engage in a lot of criminality. They engage in a lot of surprise snuggles. They get away with it oftentimes because of the judiciary in these countries. Like they have a double standard. But these things are really relegated to the bottom, like, third of the society. Right? The people that are forced to live with them. And it's the same with blacks in the U.S. Okay? Like blacks in the U.S., there's all sorts of problems with their behavior. But it's confined to the bottom third of the white population that has to deal with that, because the top 2/3 is able to move away from them. Though, as we've been discussing, this is increasingly becoming less of a thing due to the economic issues. So that's another factor that's going to come into play. But because the upper half of the white population could avoid this problem, both in Europe and in America, it was not seen as existential the same way the Indian issue is. The Indian issue is existential because they're coming after all of the lucrative high-value careers, in addition to stuff that's further down. So they're going after trucking, they're going after trades, but they're also going after engineering, they're going after politics, they're going after finance, they're going after everything, right? That is a much more existential threat to a much larger segment and a much more higher agency segment of the white population. So I think that's what the difference is. 186 cm doesn't mean shit. It varies, right? I'm certainly not somebody who thinks that height is the be-all, end-all, but I do think that it can help a lot. I think that the multiplier effect from height is not as strong as for face, but I also think that it's a lot more common than having like a really high tier face, right? Because like being 6'2", I think there was research done on this. Like being, I think over 6 feet tall gave you like a 10% boost versus the average, whereas being under, I think it was under 5'9" or 5'8", you received a 30% penalty compared to the average. So actually, it's not so much that being tall helps, it's that being short hurts a lot. That's the big issue. And I'm 5'7", I honestly don't care about height growing up. Yeah, I mean, I'm the same height as you. And it's I've never been treated badly based on my height, to be honest with you. I've never had anybody bully me or pick on me for being short ever that I can think of. But I have had women just lose interest based on that. So imagine getting conquered by a population that never successfully revolted against their leaders. Kind of, but it's a little more complicated than that, because this is the same thing that happened in Africa and in other Asian countries, where the British would bring in Indians to act as like a middleman population because they were reliable as middlemen. Actually, ironically, they sort of operated similarly to how Jews operated in medieval Europe. Because the way the Jews worked in medieval Europe is they would do jobs like tax farming. They would also run pubs. They would, I'm trying to think what else. Money lending, like all of these economic positions that were extremely unpopular with the majority population. Jews would do that, and then once the population got sufficiently fed up, like once their bills became sufficiently high, you would end up seeing the population revolt and riot against the Jews and drive them out. But in reality, I mean, we got to be fair. It's not just them, right? Okay, they were benefiting from the arrangement, but the reason why they were being used in that situation is because they were benefiting the elite classes, because the noble classes would use the Jews to really put the screws on their own population in terms of extracting wealth and also lending them money as well. So it was like a mutual agreement. And if you look at how the British Empire functioned, it's very similar. Like they would introduce Indians into African countries like Kenya, and these Indians would act as local administrators. They would run the middleman positions, the middleman careers. In exchange, they would also engage in money lending and other issues, and this created an enormous amount of hostility from the African population, which is why, what a shock, as soon as there's independence and you get actual African leaders in charge of these countries, within a few decades, they end up expelling the Indians. What a shock. Like, why wouldn't they do that? You know, it's not even that the Indians are necessarily bad, but that's the role that they're playing. And this is what happens to these kind of people. You know, the same thing happened to, I was talking about it last stream, the same thing happened to Armenians in the Armenian genocide. You know, it doesn't mean it's a good thing that it happened to them or whatever, but like because of the position that they were fulfilling in the society, they accrued all this hostility, hatred towards them. You know, Britain ejected the Jays in the Middle Ages. Funnily enough, Templars had their own racketeering methodology. That's true. And yeah, that's the funny thing is that the British, in order to eject the Jays, I'm pretty sure the king demanded this enormous ransom in exchange for ejecting them. And it was like enormous sum of gold. But, and they actually were able to raise that. They were able to raise that amount of gold. The merchant class, because they went throughout the entire country extolling all of these merchants. We need to raise this capital to expel the Jews. And as soon as they had the money to, they did expel them. And it's because the Jews were a constant pressure on the middle class, very similar to how Indians are. And one of the advantages that the Jews had was that they had these connections to other Jews in other European countries, so they could actually form business arrangements with these other European countries, like using their resources or their production or their markets to get an advantage over the English, who had to deal with being English. And therefore, like if you're English and you're trying to compete in the Dutch market, you're going to have problems because of the political tensions between England and the Netherlands at that time. But if you're Jew in the Netherlands, you can come up with some arrangement with a Jew in England and undercut the English through that means, you know? And that's often the sort of thing that they would do. This would give them an edge over us, and it would drive us out. And, you know, I'm trying to track this down. There was letters that were written. I believe it was either letters or it was the diary of Theodor Herzl, who was he was like one of the original modern Zionists in terms of coming up with the modern concept of Zionism. And he would talk about how the Viennese in Vienna held this intense hostility towards the Jews because of the Jewish competition for middle-class professions in Vienna. Because the Jews were, and you know what? You could even say, like, it's completely meritocratic. Let's assume that. It's completely meritocratic. They're out-competing the local Viennese middle class fair and square. The Viennese are still under no obligation to tolerate that. Like, why shouldn't they want to exclude this interloping group, as opposed to just allowing the Jews to dominate them as a middle class or middleman, and relegate the European population to peasantry? Because that's what happened in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Like Eastern Europe, this is why the best book, if you want to understand the JQ, the best book to read is Separation and Its Discontents. Because Kevin MacDonald goes into all of this history in that book. Culture of Critique is more of like a modern, like where he talks about their impact on modern politics in modern countries. Whereas Separation and Its Discontents, he goes back into history and uses all of these historical examples. And one of the things he makes a convincing argument for is that the reason why Eastern Europe is so backwards compared to Western Europe, or historically it was because the middle class in Eastern Europe had no opportunity to rise, because the Jews occupied and kept them out of this niche in the middle class. Like, they occupied the middle class professions. And as a result, the locals were just sort of trapped in peasantry. Whereas because the French, the English, and the Dutch, well, not the Dutch, actually, no, but the French and the English were able to expel their Jews, this allowed an independent, like a local middle class drawn from the local population to enter into the middle class professions and become the bourgeoisie of their country, bourgeois of their country, right? Whereas, the Jews kept it very restricted in Eastern Europe. It's a common tactic elites use. That's what you can see with DEI hiring to an extent. Deleter. 100%. You know what's funny about that? And this is something I'm going to be noting in a video that I've taken longer than I should have to put out. But one of the things I talk about is how there's this impression that you get, especially from leftists, but also from people in general. You'll even hear it on the alt-right. About, like, you get this impression that Europeans, they just showed up one day, guns blazing, and just mowed down everybody who's like brown or black or whatever, and just conquered all this territory. And it was like a full spectrum dominance thing or whatever. That's the impression that you get from some people if you look at how they describe the colonial empires. Whereas in reality, if you look at what actually happened, for example, if you look at the Aztecs versus the Spanish, okay, the Spanish didn't just show up in Mesoamerica and overrun everyone, okay? What they did is that they showed up as a small group, and they built a coalition of subsidiary powers that were under Aztec domination and that resented the Aztecs. They built up alliances with those subsidiaries, and then they used that alliance to attack and overthrow the local power. That's how the Spanish won in Mesoamerica against the Aztecs. They didn't just directly fight them. That's a very common strategy. The Ottomans did the same thing in the Balkans. They would use the local rivalries against the populations in the Balkans. The Ottomans also did it to the Arabs. That was one of the ways that they conquered the Arabs. Is that, again, shifting alliances, turn the smaller powers around the major power into allies in order to attack the larger power. And then once you blob to a certain point, you become unstoppable. That's what happened with the Ottomans. And what I think we're seeing now is we're seeing a sort of similar thing happening, but with liberalism, where, like, women are being offered a deal that is very hard to, like, they objectively lose if they pass this deal up. And that is, we're going to give you all these freebies. We're going to give you affirmative action. We're going to give you a favorable legal climate in any conflict with a man of your own background. And all you have to do, and we're going to basically privilege you above your own men. All you have to do is align yourself against your men politically. And there's a lot of white women that take that deal. There's a lot of white feminists that take the deal. The downside to that is that if you look at how white women are positioned on the progressive stack, they're actually below, I would say, men of color. It's a bit fuzzy, but for example, like one of the evidences that you can use to prove this is the reaction of white feminists to what was happening in the UK with Pakistanis, like Rotherham, the grooming gangs, whatever. The white feminists, the first thing they did was they attempted to equivocate or explain away the racial nature of the targeting of the white British girls. They would try and explain it away by saying white men do it too, and they would point to like one example of a grooming gang somewhere in like northern England or whatever. completely ignoring per capita in this case, or they would attack or demonize the right wing as attempting to politicize the grooming gangs for their own political agenda or whatever. And you realize like whenever there's a white woman being victimized by a POC, or white girls being victimized by a POC, the white feminist they either have to make it about men versus women, and if they can't do that, they have to side against the girls and support the POC narrative of it. It becomes kind of an unstable alliance, right? So that's the main tension, I think, that a lot of feminists are dealing with. But still, I mean, the arrangement is such that it makes it very difficult to resist the occupying power, I guess you could say, like the people in power right now. There's a bigger downside. The men of the same background will eventually resent them and give up on them. Well, you see, this is the funny thing, okay? Because this is sort of the thesis of my video, is that what you see as a response to understanding that your women can defect without any consequences, and that there's actually a fairly high chance that they will defect. And the way that white men and black men, and pretty much every other group of men, Asian men too, like, unless you're able to violently suppress your own women or punish them for defecting from your community, like, which is what certain Muslim communities can do in Europe, Pakistanis being an example, you can be quite violent. Because of that, that unique case, they don't have to worry about their women defecting. They can maintain a sort of coherent patriarchal community. Whereas if you're black or if you're white, you cannot stop black women or white women from defecting to another group of men, or just defecting from you in general and joining the liberal coalition, being a feminist. So what you do is you devalue the women as a category. Like you basically separate them from your side in some way. And you'll see black men do this with the black manosphere. Like, black men are typically hold very low value for black women. And that, like, black men, they'll put much more emphasis on if they can attract and secure a non-black woman versus a black woman. Because they understand that a non-black woman, let's say a white woman, who's like publicly signaling that she's on the black man's side on whatever issue, this is like a much stronger signal of loyalty than a black woman doing this. Because black women, it's kind of like the default, right? Whereas for a white woman, that takes a lot of cost because she's effectively defecting from her own men and presumably losing a lot of status within their eyes. Because there's a lot of white men who see white women that go with black men as not really being an option anymore after that. And white men do, I think, something similar, because you'll see this phenomenon. As somebody pointed this out, it was really funny, right? Of what's his name, Eric Orwell, with all the white men trying to get into his compound that have non-white wives. That's a stronger loyalty signal. If you're like an Asian woman or some other race of woman, and you're like openly siding with the white nationalist point of view, that is seen as a loyalty signal by white men, because you don't really gain anything from that, right? Like, there's no, like, the white nationalist faction is a low status outsider faction, right? Nobody attaches any value to that faction, and as a matter of fact, you lose a lot of status by signaling that you're part of that faction, right? So it's very high risk, actually. And then on top of that, if you look at how, like, white nationalist messaging is exclusively targeted towards white women, right? So they will always be like simping and cucking for white women, but they don't do that for any other race of women. So if another race of woman like plants her flag on the white nationalist / white identitarian, there's like, they're not necessarily explicitly racial nationalists, but if they plant their flag on Team White Man, this is seen as a stronger loyalty signal than a white woman doing it, is the bottom line. But the problem is that dissolves all these communities, But POC men benefit more than white Jewish men. White Jewish men still have to be good looking like white men. Well, yeah, Jewish guys are in the same boat, really, in some ways, because they can't prevent defection either. Like, though I do think Jewish men have a higher percentage of outbreeding than Jewish women. It's still not that. It's not like black men versus black women. It's more like a difference of like 10-20%. So there's like 55 to 58% Jewish men outbreeding versus 45 to 42% Jewish women. But even then, it still is like a large percentage on both sides. You can't prevent them from doing that because they don't have like serious defection prevention options. Like as a Jewish man, you cannot like firebomb a Jewish woman because she's out with a non-Jewish guy, right? Actually, what's funny about this? I remember reading about this story in Israel of this Jewish, I think it was I'm not sure if it was in the West Bank, in the colonies, or if it was in Israel itself. But there were like these Orthodox Jews that would drive around vehicles and basically kidnap Jewish women that were spotted with Arab men. Because it's like they were trying to rescue them from the Arab men. And they would actually like drive around, and if they saw the Arab man, they would... or they saw a Jewish woman with an Arab man, they would basically like drag the Jewish woman in a car and drive her off in order to protect her from this brainwashing or some bullshit. I remember reading about that somewhere. But I'm pretty sure that didn't last very long, because at the end of the day, Israel does have like a fundamentally liberal system where you can't just curtail women's rights like that. So even then, they're kind of screwed over. What's my channel email? I'll type it. That's my channel email. And actually, let me see if there's something else we got here. Oh yeah, this is a good one, by the way. This is a good X post that I quite liked. This is officer friendly, so he's pretty prolific, and he doesn't always post good stuff, but this is a good one. He says, because the video, and he's talking about this one here. He's talking about this.
Gen Z bustin' a mini. Gen Z bustin' a...
I'm not playing that, but this is the video that he's referencing, right? Anyways, because the video triggers major insecurity, and the guy's asking like, why does it make men so angry to see this video? And it says, because the video triggers insecurities young men have about status and mating. Gen Z boss in a mini is a reminder that they are locked out of status by affirmative action, but women are fast-tracked. 5'2" in an attitude reminds them that height often excludes them on dating apps, and women can get away with having an attitude, but they can't. Itty bitty titties in a bob reminds them of how a girl with short hair and small breasts is basically aspirational now, despite general male preference being for large breasts and long hair. New Frank Green in a sneaky link reminds them that these mid-girls are having anonymous casual sex that they can't have, and stokes fears that the only girls available to them are run-through. The fact that everyone is describing this video insists on describing these girls as attractive when they are okay at best. Young women having fun at work while having higher status and higher income than them, while they work menial, low-status, low-pay jobs where they can't have fun, is also painful. 100%. This was a really good post, and it was 100% correct. I remember when I first saw it, that was my reaction. Apparently, this is actually a successful makeup company or something in Australia. And actually, it's a bit of a race pill too, because if you look at the women involved here, Like the rice void gets mogged so fucking hard by all these other women, even the ones that aren't really that good looking. The rice void is so much worse. Like they really are subhuman. I don't know where I don't know where the concept of yellow fever came from. The idea that there was white men that were actually like obsessed with Asian women in some way. This never happened. I can guarantee you. Having known guys that have gone with Asian women, the only reason they do it is because it's a better return on investment based on what they're starting with. All right. It's like buying a property in a cheaper area than where you grew up because you know that the property values are overpriced where you grew up. That's basically like the same logic. All right. And actually, here's some more rage bait for you. Let me just find this here. Here. They actually made a sequel to it. All right, let's listen to this.
Gender pay gap, bring it back. Gender pay gap, bring it back. It's giving millennial core. It's giving millennial core. Women should go back to the kitchen. Women should go back to the kitchen. Try not to cringe, impossible. Try not to cringe, impossible. Make it stop, hate this. Make it stop, hate this. Buy them on a hoop. Buy them on a hoop.
By the way, if you guys want to know what happened to this, if you want to know what happened to this company, it was bought out by some boomer. And the woman who started it, and I think all these other women, they made like at least $1 million plus in compensation for it. So yeah, they were able to win. You know, so every guy that's dunking on them, I hate to say it. It's just a fact that they're doing a lot better than we are. You were still too young for yellow fever, dark pills with Mercer. I don't know about that. Like, I think honestly, I would take Latinas over Asian girls, pretty much 10 times out of 10, including like mulatto Dominican ones. In fact, I would probably have to say that would be my preferred go-to over Asians. Not to say that I have much of a choice either way, right? Like, I'm not being picky, okay? So, yeah. Brown Hispanics LARPing as white means white people in the future are going to have light skin, brown eyes, and black hair. 92 IQ mixed race people. That's true. But you know what? It's not the worst outcome, to be honest with you. I think if they were to shut their borders now, and they were to go through the illegals that they have now and just get rid of the useless ones, like the ones that are just really low IQ, but keep the ones that are at least somewhat close to whites in terms of their cognitive ability, like maybe 95 plus IQ. They just got rid of the ones stupider than that, and then they shut the borders from then on. I think they could actually survive as a country. Now, let me clarify. That doesn't mean that it would be optimal. And that doesn't mean that America would be the same. Fundamentally, America would be a completely different, it would be something else from what it was originally. I think that we're never going back to that. Like the Leave It to Beaver America. I kind of have the same impression of Canada. I don't think we're ever really going to go back to 97% white Canada. But I think America, unlike Europe, where I think that they will have like proper civil wars in Europe because they're just completely incompatible. They're mutually hostile on a level that does not exist in America. Whereas Hispanics are not mutually hostile to whites. They just don't. Because white people exist in Latin American countries. It's possible to be white in the Latin American culture. As a matter of fact, it's aspirational to be white in Latin American culture, largely. Because they're like a genetic spectrum. And the upper classes are typically the whitest, right? So white, Latinas, Asians, blacks. Yeah, I would say that probably is pretty correct. I've seen black women that can be quite attractive, but the problem with black women is they usually don't seem to take care of themselves. You know, Also, they are very different physically from us. And you refuse to like take the collective dismal pill. Javier, can you explain what the collective dismal pill is? Oh, Kanji doll, what did you send me here? Chatting with the boy. Oh, is this from is this Western Decline? I think you just sent me Western Decline's streams, right? That I did with him. Yeah, some of them are pretty good, actually. So thank you. I'll take a look at that, actually. You know, I don't know how much use we could get out of them, because I don't think we said anything really that profound on it. We mostly just disagreed about the curry pill in Canada. I think that was pretty much our main conversation, right? I thought it was still an interesting convo, though. Bro, literally the ultimate method is just be HWHJ. Just be half white, half Jacob. What's half white, half Jacob, St. Verse? Can you explain that to me? Oh, collective dismal pill is race mixing with an Asian void. I think if you can have a daughter, I think being a Hapa can be pretty nice if you have a daughter. But if you have a son, I mean, it's a different situation. Also, I mean, I think it's just on a personal level. I find it harder to connect with the way East Asian cultures tend to work versus Latin American or even Black cultures. Like, they're just not a social culture. One of the things you hear from a lot of people talking about like living in Japan, let's say, as like a white person, is that yes, it's very safe and it's very clean, but it's also very lonely because people are just not social, you know? And I think, honestly, I think that this is like a genetic tendency that gets amplified culturally and it becomes a loop. Because I remember there's this a YouTube channel called Voices of the Past where he talks about, like he'll narrate these letters that were sent from historical people. And like one of the letters that he sent was from, I believe it was Shogunate Japan. So this was Japan before they fully opened up to the West. It was like one of the first envoys that was sent to Japan from, or sent to America rather, from Japan. And he was noting how like all these white people, whenever they would have free time, they would set up festivals in open air and they would go dancing and they would do these like things. And he said like the Japanese, their ideal is to be contained within their own household and basically be quiet and alone. Whereas for white people, they have this sort of like social communal element that they found really hard to understand. And you have to think about how a genetic tendency will feed into a cultural tendency and then it reinforces itself. Like imagine that you have a genetic tendency to introversion, okay? So the bulk of your population is introverted, and you'll have on either side, you'll have like even more extreme introversion on the one end, and then you'll have some extroversion on the other end. But because the bulk of the population, majority of the population is introverted, that becomes an ideal way of behaving. And extroverted behavior, for example, when you go up and talk to people just on the street just for the sake of talking, instead of this being seen in a positive lens, this is seen as like hassling them or in some way bothering them, and it becomes like a negative association. And then that feeds into like who is selected in the population due to the cultural preference. So not only do you have this initial genetic tendency, but that genetic tendency gets reinforced through who is getting selected as the ideal behavioral model for the culture. So like more extroverted Japanese people might be selected against because they don't fit the cultural mode, the cultural stereotype appropriately. And people view that as not as normal behavior, as like outside the acceptable limit of behavior. And it becomes a reinforcing cycle. Right? And I think a lot of East Asian countries, they got pulled somewhat towards the European averages just due to their, like if you look at what happened to a country like Japan, or actually all the East Asian countries, Japan, China, Korea, they all got completely gutted. Their original cultures got completely gutted and replaced with a European rooted social norms, like their legal and societal, their legal and judicial system. That's what I'm looking for. Their legal and judicial system is entirely based on European norms. So this is like liberal, individual rights based stuff. And then over top of it, there's like this veneer of their original culture. So as a result, like when they reformed their laws along European lines, and they like reformed their marriage norms along European lines, that would pull them towards, it would incentivize more European-like people in that culture. They would become less of an outlier, and they would be seen as more of an ideal. So like, for example, Japanese that are more prone to marry for romantic attachment or whatever, and that are more prone to like seek out social situations as opposed to being introverted. Those who get selected more compared to the past. But I think as the West pulls back and as our systems collapse on themselves, you're going to see a reversion to the mean in these countries. You know, China actually, people think that China was an exception to this. It's not. China had its old culture completely gutted and replaced with a Soviet-style culture. The only difference is the direction of European influence. So in Japan and in South Korea, the direction was Western European influence, like American influence. In China, the direction was Soviet Russian influence in terms of like remaking their cultural values, right? So I think the bottom line is, I think their racial tendencies are going to reassert themselves once European influence dies down. And at least for like personal preference, their racial tendencies and the cultures that those create, they don't really feel comfortable for me. Even though they would be very nice to live in terms of like, you're always going to be safe. Infrastructure is probably always going to work. You could probably leave your wallet out on a bench and then come back the next day, it'll still be there. But the social culture is going to be very alienating and very isolating. You know, that's the main issue. Whereas in Latin America, you don't have that. You know, yeah, Latin America, it's a lot messier. There's a lot more criminality, but the social behavior is a lot more European-like, you know. Whites should team up with smart East Asians, not mixed-race Latinos. Well, I mean, there's not really going to be much of a choice because East Asians and whites are collapsing in fertility. We're both going to be... I think you're going to see I don't know if this is going to be a generational shift, like the shift will happen as the older generations die off, but eventually it's going to occur to a lot of these countries that they're facing like an existential crisis where the world is going to be dominated by these black and brown races, basically. And the East Asians, like Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, and the Europeans are rapidly shrinking sort of pinpricks of light in a increasingly dark world in terms of like the sophistication of the culture, you know? Now, I've actually argued in previous streams, and I still take this position, that, Kenji Doll, the conversation with Hoka is there too. Oh, excellent. That would be really good because there are some clips that I want to clip of that. So thank you very much. Anyways, though, shit, what was I saying? So I've taken the position that it's actually not necessarily a bad thing for your culture to become less sophisticated and capable of controlling the population. So, like, for example, a lot of Latin American countries, they don't really have an adequate police force. You cannot rely on a lot of the Latin American governments to protect you from crime, especially outside of the capital city, basically. Like, a lot of them don't even control anything outside their capital. As a consequence, women have a stronger value towards men than they otherwise would, because men are also providing security, and in addition to there not being the same amount of protection, physical protection from criminality in the society by police, there's also a lot less social protection. They don't have social safety nets in these countries. The money's just not there for it. So as a result, men also have an economic value there, right? So there's actually some benefits to our countries becoming more shitty in the long run. In the short term, it's going to suck for everybody, because these systems basically have to decay to the point where they can no longer provide what they're providing. And that still is a ways to go. You know, black birth rate is way lower than the white birth rate in America. Yeah, Javier, that's true, but there's over 1 billion Africans. And there's plenty of them that want to come to America and other countries, right? And there's going to be intense pressure from the capitalist class to bring them into our countries. Again, it doesn't even matter how intelligent or whatever they are. They don't have to perform at the same level as Europeans. All they have to do is increase the economic activity and operate economically in the society, right? They increase aggregate demand. That's what's important, okay? So the business class will want to bring them in. And yes, they will redistribute wealth. Like, they will take money from the rest of us to give to these people, and it will decrease the overall living standards. But the point is, again, like, if you're the CEO of Walmart, your only concern is that your sales are growing every year. Okay, as long as your sales can continue to grow every year, which is going to be a function of population growth, because everybody needs food, everybody needs a shelter, everybody needs these basic accommodations and commodities. Okay, because of that, a perpetual population growth, even if the quality of the people is going down that you're bringing in, perpetual population growth is more important. Even if everyone else's living standard goes down, your only concern is how the stock market is going and how, for example, your particular stock is going, right? So you have to understand the interest groups here, because I've seen a lot of people argue like, but objectively speaking, the quality of life is getting worse for everybody. How is this? This isn't economically rational. Why are these businesses supporting a system that causes everyone to get poorer? And it's because, yeah, everyone on the net is getting poorer, but they themselves are continuing to become wealthier. And as a matter of fact, it's better if the wealth gap grows between them and the rest of us, because that gives them more and more leverage over the rest of us, right? It's like, this is how you get situations where, like, you can go to certain countries and if you have enough money, you can surprise snuggle and unalive children, basically, you know? Like, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you can do stuff like that in certain countries if you have enough money, because people are that desperate that they'll traffic children to enable that, okay? I'm not saying every billionaire wants to do that, but this increases the breadth of freedom that they have by making the rest of the population more dependent on them and more desperate, okay? So they actually benefit from that arrangement. Right. Can I comment on the former SK president? You mean the one that did a weird sort of LARP coup and then got arrested? He's just an idiot. There's not really much else to say. I mean, he kind of reminds me of Bolsonaro in Brazil. Bolsonaro is this idiot who he did a half-assed attempt to coup the country, and he failed, and he just got thrown in jail, and so did all of his supporters. That's what happens when you half-ass it. You know, a lot of these populists, they just half-ass it. And unfortunately, this is what happened in Korea. You know, like you can't... South Korea was unfortunate because the guy, even though he's kind of corrupt, he was campaigning on the right demographic, right? He was campaigning on our demographic. And unfortunately, him fucking up the way that he did probably did a lot of damage to that political category of like excess young men. You know? Black and brown people will never dominate the planet. LMAO, ever even thinking about that? Well, dominate isn't the question. Like, I'm not talking about them being in like political control as nations or whatever. Like, at the end of the day, what's going to happen is like America is the center of this oligarchy that America is the center of this international billionaire oligarchy, and they have this sort of nation they're latched onto, that they want to detach themselves from. Like, you could tell, like the American economic elite class, they do not want to be connected to the American nation anymore. You know, so increasingly, they are trying to separate from them. And really, if you think about it, like the way it works now, America is like this dumping ground for aggregate demand. Okay, like they'll bring in all these brown people from Latin America as illegals to just increase aggregate demand. So they work as illegals, doing illegals, like construction, whatever. They have to buy things. They send money back, but they also buy things. They also rent places. So they generate aggregate demand in America. Downwardly mobile whites. Yeah, they're downwardly mobile, whatever, you know, and the ones that are used to have manufacturing jobs, and those are gone. Yeah, they're like smoking meth and committing suicide, whatever. But they're still buying things, right? The aggregate demand is still there in America. That's the important part. And you bring in these people from these other countries that can outcompete Americans. And actually, it's funny. There was this tweet I saw that was quite intelligent, and they were predicting that as the H-1B competition makes, for example, computer science unviable for intelligent young Americans, they're going to start diverting from that and into other things. And what this does is this creates a native deficit of computer science graduates because it's uncompetitive. This incentivizes even more H-1Bs to be brought in to do computer science. Because now they've actually artificially engineered a shortage by making H-1Bs uncompetitive, or making computer science an uncompetitive field. If you're trying to get into it, you're not able to compete, and as a result, this could end up with like entire sections of the economy getting displaced by H-1Bs. So. And you almost have to wonder, is this by design or is this just a side effect? I tend to lean towards it being a side effect. But, this could be a way that the American business class, they're trying to cut out actual American citizens from holding any levers in the upper society, the elite segments of society, you know? You saying that now, it was pathetic, but the fact that the idea of a coup crossed his mind is interesting. You'd see this thing 10 years ago. Yeah, kind of. Well, South Korea, they're sort of known for doing this sort of shit. If you look at a lot of these countries, other than Japan, South Korea and Taiwan, they were both dictatorships, I think, until the 90s. Taiwan, I know, was a dictatorship until the 90s under the Kuomintang, which is like their nationalist party. And that nationalist party is now aligned with China, interestingly. And their libtard party is the Taiwan Independence. It's like the Democrat Party in Taiwan. And I remember predicting that the way that Taiwan would shake out is the Kuomintang party would align itself with China, and at some point they would organize a coup of the Taiwanese government and then arrange a special administrative relationship between the Kuomintang-led Taiwan and the People's Republic of China. And they would do it without a shot being fired externally. Like there will be shots fired within Taiwan, but it won't be shots fired at China. That's what I suspect. East Asians don't have to let the black and brown people in Europe. Will probably kick out the Muslims too. The problem is you're facing a constant pressure from capitalists because there needs to be perpetual growth. Because if you don't have perpetual growth, you run into a situation where it becomes unviable to risk your assets, risk your assets in an investment in the private market. Because it's safer just to buy like a precious metal or something or some other asset, or to take the money out of the country, go somewhere else. You know, like the reason why they put their money into the stock market is because of there's a perpetual growth in the monetary supply that makes it so that if you're just sitting on money, it's losing value perpetually. So you need to put it somewhere to retain the value through investment growth. But in order to have investment growth, you need to have economic growth. Well, how do you have economic growth? You need to grow the population. Another way would be opening markets. Like this is why there was a free trade agreement with China. And, it wasn't exactly a free trade agreement. China joined the World Trade Organization. They normalized relations with the rest of the world. And that opened up the normal trade routes between China and the rest of the world. And as a result, China eventually was able to outproduce everyone else just because of the sheer scale of their population. But there was a lot of investors that made enormous sums of money investing in China. You know, because China was growing 5% compounding each year. If America's only growing 1 or 2%, or like anywhere else in the developed world is only growing 1 or 2%, why wouldn't you invest in China instead? And the theory was, we're going to invest in China, and then we're going to bring that money back home. And the profit from that investment will be injected back into the American economy by the trickle-down economics theories, basically. Like the business class will inject this money into the American economy through their own spending within the American economy, because it's not staying in China. The investment is flowing back into America. But we know in practice that just results in accumulating and hoarding assets. And also just pumping money into the stock market, but it doesn't actually translate into productive growth. Like we know what has happened since then. What if we print money, send it to Israel, then tax citizens, then send tax money to Israel, and buy politicians, print money and lend interest-free loans to Israel, interest to non-American? Yeah, that would actually be really brilliant. If I was one of God's chosen people, that's exactly what I would be doing. I don't think the Chinese or other Asians who are xenophobic will replace themselves. It's more likely that American neoliberal hegemony collapses and China becomes the new world power. I think China could do that. The problem is China's massively overpopulated. That's their problem. They need to drop their population by they need to drop it down to 400 million. I know that there's theories that their population is faked and that they actually have a population that's more like 900 million. Even that's too much. It shouldn't be that much. It should only be about 400 million at most. And that would be sustainable within their resources and within their available living space. The quality of life would increase proportionally by quite a dramatic amount. As I was saying before, I think, the Rockefellers and the Mellons and these other WASP billionaires that were talking about population control from the 50s to the 80s, those were actually the good guys, right? They were correct. Like if we had a population of let's say 2 billion people instead of 8 billion or however much billion it is now, if we only had 2 billion people, we would be probably pretty close to post-scarcity at this point with the increase in productivity we've had since then. And if India only had 300 million people, they would be the food exporting superpower in the world. But because they have such an enormous bloated population, they spend almost all of their food production. They end up having to use it to feed their own population just because there's so many people. YouTube deleted my comment about hollowing out American factories and using printed money to buy all the media and institutions. Well, I don't think they had to use printed money for that. They already had that. Like the situation with Hollywood, that goes back to like the turn of the century. I'm pretty sure that Hollywood went to California in order to avoid paying royalties to Thomas Edison. I believe it was Thomas Edison. In order to avoid having to pay royalties to him for moving pictures, I believe. I'm going off memory here, so I'm not 100% certain. But, so they've been at it for quite a while, as a matter of fact. Only Americans don't deserve free healthcare. Only Israelis deserve healthcare off American tax money. Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro also said you're not entitled to live where you grew up. And this is actually a really critical thing. Actually, let me see if I can find that. Hang on. Let's see if I can find this. I'm finding people reacting to it, but let me see here. I can't stand this fucker's voice. Holy crap. Hu Jintao was more market-friendly and open to the West. The Orwellian top-down control only ramped up after 2013. Well, I'm pretty sure there was an attempt because a lot of the usual suspects were trying to enter into China's economy. Like they were attempting to wine and dine Communist Party elites to try and gain access to the Chinese economy, Chinese media, and they were even like attempting to marry into the Chinese population, the usual tactics that they used. And it appears that the CCP stonewalled them and forced them out. And this is why there's been this about turn on China since Xi Jinping. What's this? Is this it? I'm trying to find this Ben Shapiro clip. Is this it?
Ben Shapiro had this conversation on trigonometry.
If you're a young person and you can't afford to live here, then maybe...
Here, this will be good enough. All right. Let's see here.
Advil targets pain caused by inflammation for fast, effective relief. Advil, that's real strength.
I'll tell you what I think about transhumanism after this.
Ben Shapiro had...
Let me turn this up, and I'm going to mute myself.
This conversation on trigonometry.
If you're a young person and you can't afford to live here, then maybe you should not live here. I mean, that is a real thing. Yeah, I know that we've now grown up in a society that says that you deserve to live where you grew up, but the reality is that the history of America is almost literally the opposite of that. The history of America is you go to a place where there is opportunity. And if the opportunities are limited here and they're not changing, then you really should try to think about other places where you have better opportunities.
This guy says you do not deserve...
Okay, what's important about this is that Ben is actually right about this, in a sense. Technically, he's correct. like the way America functioned, there was always this pressure to bring in people, especially from the North. Like after the Civil War decided the character of America, because the Civil War was fought between the South, which had a much more parochial, I suppose you could say, less efficient, less monetarily focused way of treating American society. Now, obviously, they were fighting. Slavery was a major factor, and there was huge problems associated with slavery. But the important thing is the way that they approached the society. Right? It wasn't like economic imperatives weren't considered the number one, like the focus of the state. Like if you look at how the North, and really actually I would actually say that the South is more of a deviation from the original founders' beliefs. Because if you look at how the founders, like Thomas Paine was like one of the most ideologically coherent. Their worldview really was like America exists to enforce contracts. Well, what that means is like the political system in America exists as a machine to ensure that trade and business operates as fluidly as possible. Well, in that situation, if you want to have an efficient market, you need to have as much labor mobility as possible. Okay, in order to have labor mobility, you cannot allow any impediments to population migration for economic reasons and business migration for economic reasons, right? You need to allow the population to allocate itself where it's most efficiently used in terms of labor. But the effect of this is that this causes culture to collapse. And if you think about America really hasn't had a culture. Like we know what American culture is in terms of like, there's the Yankees in the North, like the Puritans in the North, and Massachusetts WASPs, like that kind of Presbyterian Enlightenment / religious radical types. And then you have the South that had its own genuinely unique, distinct culture. But after that point, there's no real cultural distinction. Like if you think about the Ellis Islanders, they came over and they imported their own original cultures. Like the Italians created like little Italies in different places. The Germans created their own little communities. And then once the blacks moved up north and they were strategically pushed into cities where they would disrupt those communities and drive people out into the suburbs, that caused all of these ethnic whites to get mixed up together into these sort of generic white people that have nothing in common with each other but their economic class. And as a result, you can't create culture. Like, I could talk to an American whose family's been here since the 19th century. But if I try to ask him, like, what does it mean to be an American? I don't know what it... Like, I guess 4th of July, football, like guns, I guess. You know, like what... Whereas if you ask somebody, like, what does it mean to be French? And I mean, like, a real French person, obviously not a libtard. But if you talk to, like, a French person, they'll be able to point to, like, some cathedral that was built 1,000 years ago. And you realize, like, or you could go to villages, let's say, in Eastern Europe. You know, you could go to Hungary, for example, and you'll find villages of, like, 200 or 300 people scattered all over the place. And those villages have been continuously occupied by those families for, like, hundreds of years. Right? Like, they have hundreds of years of continuity in the region. And this is how you create a culture. A culture is created through you live in a spot and you have children. Your children live in the same location next to other people that they've had some familial connection to, or just living in proximity to them. And then they produce, because they are associating with each other and not a wider population, they're not interacting with others outside of this specific community. This is how they create a local culture, right? And when you dissolve that by allowing migration in and out of an area, or you make it impossible for people to have these continuous routes that they set down, and they don't have multiple generations in the same area, you then eventually the culture just disappears. Like, there was a time, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a time when Chicago and New York and Boston And I'm trying to think of some other cities. I mean, Detroit, before Detroit became what it is now, I'll put it that way. All these cities had like a unique culture to them, because they were, and you know, there was migration obviously, but the thing is that, for example, in America, they shut down the borders between 1924 and 1965 to immigration from Europe, and as a consequence, the people that were in these cities, they became cut off from the motherland. There was no more inflow of their people, and they eventually began to associate with others that they were overlapping with in those cities, and they created a unique cultural milieu. You know, when you would go to Chicago and you would talk to people in Chicago in the 1960s or whatever, you could tell like there were certain characteristics about them, you know. You go to New York. I mean, New Yorkers were notorious for having a very... There's this one guy actually on my server, and he's also on Face and LMS's server. I won't dox him, but I mean, if you're ever on a voice chat with us, you'll know him. But he's from, I think he's from Boston. And he's actually older. I'm pretty sure he's in his 50s. I know we get some pretty old people sometimes. No offense to him if he's listening to this. But... he has like this really thick Boston accent. Like he sounds like straight out of a caricature of like a New York, Boston, you know, fuck your mother, that sort of thing. Gabagool. And I remember like the first time I heard him, I thought he was actually trolling, because you don't hear that accent anymore. Like not really, not in a distinct way. But that was his real accent. The only reason why he has that accent is because he's in his 50s, and he grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s when there was still enough of a regional, like he was only interacting with other Bostoners for the most part, and as a consequence, that accent was retained, you know. Whereas nowadays, if you're like born in New York or whatever, you're probably from like a second generation family. Your parents probably are immigrants, and you're talking with other kids on Discord. You know, and we're creating like this general North American dialect where there's no real distinction anymore, you know? Like even when I listen to my own mother compared to how I talk, I notice that there's a distinction between how she talks versus how I talk, you know? Like I've sort of assimilated into the mono accent, North American mono accent, I guess you could say, you know? Whereas if you go to the Ottawa Valley, there's a distinct twang. It actually sounds very similar to parts of the American South, where, you know, oh, don't you know, that sort of thing. It's real. Being European doesn't mean you still hold traditional European culture. Most people I know actively reject their heritage, and I'm not American. I agree with you, I'm not real. You're right, but I think that that's a recent phenomenon, and I think that's due to... American institutions dominating the globe after World War II. Like World War II abolished the right wing. Like the world became divided between Western liberalism, as you say, and Soviet communism, Marxism. Those are the only two options that you had. Nationalism had been discredited in the eyes of the public, and it lost all its political power because there was no powerful nationalist faction. You know, there was like Spain, I guess, under Franco, but Franco was a bit of an idiot. He didn't have any real thoughts in his head. He was just going with the flow. But yeah, after Nazi Germany and fascist Italy was gone, that was it. You know, so the rest of the world just eventually started to align itself with American liberalism. And also a lot of that is institutional. Like most of the continental European countries, they had their governments overthrown, and they either had communist governments getting put in place, or they had liberal Democrat governments put in place, usually with built-in breakers to prevent any kind of genuine nationalist party from democratically winning. Like Germany has constitutional clauses explicitly banning parties that are even remotely right-wing, you know? They call it muscular democracy. Well, what is muscular democracy? It means that it's a democracy until you vote for something outside of the predefined Overton window, and then you just get banned. Canada has the same problem. And you can argue that the system actively prevents white Americans from developing their own proper ethnogenesis. Yeah, I mean, that's true, but some of that's also just natural drift, I think. Because, like, if I look at the milieu of people that I talk to regularly, they'll be from, like, all different races, largely American, but not always. Like one third, or maybe like 1/4 Canadian, 3/4 American. There's also some Europeans in there too. But we're all talking with each other. They're not talking with their own local communities, you know? Oh, what do we have here? I just get a super chat? Oh, well, thank you very much. Celestial Armor. Love your content. Thanks for coming back. I take long drives. These are gold for 3-hour trips. Thanks for being consistent. Well, thank you very much, Celestial Armor. I really appreciate it. Glad to hear it. Yeah, I've been trying to keep it consistent. Thankfully, the job that I'm starting is, it's a full-time, but Sundays are always off. So don't see any reason why I couldn't stream Sundays. As long as I plan around it. Okay, anyways, transhumanism. My opinion on transhumanism. Look, you could get into deep philosophical conversations about it. Like, what is the essence of human? Whether it's pragmatic or not, or whatever. Like, if this is like the end goal of materialism. In my opinion, the way I look at it, my concern is that humans don't have the foresight. This is I have the same opinion on transhumanism that I have on eugenics, where we're assuming that we can plan this out in a way that might not necessarily be the case. We assume that, for example, like you could have the idea that we can select an embryo based on this polygenic score that has an IQ of 140. But what happens if you end up selecting for things? Like, I remember there was a post on X that was really good about it, and they described it as like glass cannon, min-maxing your kids, where you'll end up selecting for things and there could be unforeseen consequences. Or you could end up selecting against things. For example, psychopathy. Like, there's a genetic predisposition to psychopathy, but there's also evidence that if you have this genetic profile and you don't experience childhood abuse, you will have a psychological character. I think I got interrupted there a little bit. Sorry about that. But I remember having this thought in the technogametic state, but I don't think I could squeeze it in anywhere. But it's where, like, if you have like AI controlled waifu bots that are centrally controlled, well, if there is any possibility for AI to become sentient, or even like quasi-sentient AGI, like, it doesn't even have to be true AGI, it could just be quasi-AGI. This would be the perfect means through which they could hijack the society by having like centrally controlled waifu bots that pass a certain value system down to the children that they caretake. You know, like if an AI is able to get control of that central intelligence, they can then use that to manipulate the population at large and eventually like engineer the population around what they want. And it's called the revolutionary phenotype. A guy called, what's his name? Let me pull him up here. Revolutionary phenotype. Let's see. The revolutionary phenotype. Yeah, J.F. Gariepi. That's it. J.F. Gariepi. Let me see here. This guy right here. And the way that he argued the revolutionary phenotype worked, it's where the blueprint designer of the organism is really what defines the organism. So, for example, if you start with mitochondria, right? And mitochondria was originally a fully functional single-celled organism that was independent. It operated on its own. It was a prokaryote. And then a eukaryotic cell eventually swallowed it and then assimilated it into itself, where it was providing the resources for the mitochondria, and the mitochondria was providing ATP, which is the energy source that they generate. Over time, because the eukaryotic cell was determining the cell division, like when the cell would divide and how, eventually the mitochondria lost more and more of its genes that were associated with independent survival, because it was dependent on the eukaryotic cell. Eventually, it became just what it is now, which is like a power bank for the cell. And it has no independent existence. It's completely dependent on the cell that it's encased by, even though initially it was a separate organism. Humans could become the same. Like eventually, if an AI is able to take central control of like a centrally controlled reproductive system, like a artificial womb that they centrally control, the AI could then genetically sculpt humans to just perform whatever function that it needs. Like it doesn't need a fully independently functioning human. It could pre-design humans that would grow rapidly within like a few years, and then exist as adult beings for maybe 10 years, and then die immediately. And there's no way that we why wouldn't it do that? They wouldn't need a fully functional human. As a matter of fact, a fully functional human is a problem, because that human could have other ideas, right? Yeah, JF did in his wife, and it's only a matter of time before they get him. You know what? I mean, it's possible. Quebecois are very strange people, okay? If you look at our ancestry, we're like descended from 8,500 people, I think. And all the population growth came from natural increase. There was no immigration. So it's actually genetically a very small genetic population that expanded very rapidly. So some very eccentric phenotypes that maybe would not have been selected for in France got selected for in Quebec. That's my theory, anyways. All the bullshit leads to communism, leads to you-know-whos, so the solution is... Well, actually, I think the you-know-whos are going to disappear in a couple generations as a significant group because of the degree to which they're outbreeding. Like, I think it's a natural tendency for people to want to believe that there is an organized conspiracy to do something. But I think the reality is that there's a lot more autopilot that's going on than people think. And that's a lot less comforting, because at least if it's some organized plan, there's like a process that they're attempting to unfold, and perhaps there's somewhere that you could interrupt it, or you can plan around this eventual conclusion that they have in mind. Whereas in reality, I think to a large extent, they're going on autopilot, right? Because like a good example I brought up before is why would Israel, why would the you-know-whos support mass migration of Muslims into European countries? And the thing is, what guys like Mike Pinovich will say, or Mike Enoch, as he's known from the rightstuff.biz, he will claim that the reason why they support mass migration into Europe is to clear out their neighbors of potential fighting age men that could oppose Israel. And there's some truth to that. Like, I think they want to get rid of the Gazans, definitely. They want to get rid of the Gazans. because they want to colonize the Gaza city region. But if you look at migration into France, into Germany, into England, there's no Levantines that are involved here, except for the most recent Syrian wave, okay? Other than that, like if you look at France, the Muslims in France are North Africans for the most part, or Sub-Saharan Africans. The Muslims in Germany are mostly Turks. The Muslims in England are mostly Pakistanis. Muslims in Sweden are mostly like a mix of Somalis, Kurds. There's just not that many Arabs. Like there are some, and as I said, like there was a whole bunch of them that came over in the Syrian war, but the bulk of like the migration going back into the 70s for places like France and Germany, they were from North Africa, they were from Turkey. Okay, and all this does is this increases hostility towards Israel, and it creates a demographic who will be sympathetic to anti-Israel sentiment being expressed politically. Right, you're already seeing this with Muslims in England supporting the Green Party, which is officially anti-Zionist. All right, so I don't think that there's an active plan here that's like completely coherent and integrated together. I think that there's the Israelis, which are primarily focused on, yes, they want to get rid of Palestinians. They want to get rid of, like if they can remove Syrians and deplete Assad's army, that's what they would liked. That's what they would prefer. But I think that that's the limit to their operation. Like they want to get rid of maybe Palestinians for the most part. All right. Whereas the you-know-who's in Europe that encouraged these migration pacts, like refugee pacts, for example, they were primarily concerned with diversifying Europe to make it safer for them in Europe, right? Because the idea is like these monolithic European societies are what created a vulnerability for us. Like that's how we were targeted. If we diversify the societies and make it so that they're a mosaic of all these different minority groups, we cannot be individually targeted and singled out, and we can create coalitions to politically contest the majority population and keep them under heel, right? But these are conflicting positions because again, like the people that they've brought in are people that are structurally hostile to Israel, like from a deep ideological point of view, and all that does is that creates a political platform for increased hostility towards Israel. Right, so that's a good example of there not really being a unified plan. There's like two separate plans that are operating, and they're actually in contradiction with each other. They're creating a contradiction. Right, and then furthermore, if you look at, for example, what was established after World War II, like the Nuremberg Consensus, it was all about like we're going to abolish nationalism, and we're going to codify liberal universalism as the legal norm. We're going to basically outlaw nationalism. That's effectively what they did. If you create international law and you bind countries to international law, that is eliminating their sovereignty. All right. Well, in practice, what it does is like the international law. What it did was it created a system by which the real powerful countries, which would be like the Soviet Union, the United States, I suppose China later on, can impose themselves on weaker countries by using these international laws to circumvent their sovereignty or to curtail their sovereignty. Because really, a country's not sovereign unless it can do whatever it wants within its own borders. Like if a country wants to massacre a population within its borders and is able to do it, that is a sovereign state, basically, right? If an external power can come in and prevent them from doing that, even if they have the political will to do it, they're not a sovereign state. Right? So international law was created to eliminate sovereignty everywhere but in the top like 2 or 3 countries, like the top superpowers. And Israel's existence and like the way that they've parasitized America and the way that they're able to openly defy this system and like undermine its moral credibility, that's actually extremely damaging for the internationalist faction of Jews. This doesn't benefit them at all, right? As a matter of fact, like the way that most of us became aware of Israel, or aware of them, I should say, is how Israel was able to uniquely get away with things that no one else could get away with, right? So, yeah, that's kind of long-winded, but this is why I'm skeptical of people that say that there's an organized plan, like in a conspiratorial way. I think it's a lot messier than people realize. And the same goes for boomers, right? Like, a lot of what's happened with boomers, it's not that boomers actively planned this thing out. It's that they just didn't stop it because they were benefiting from it, you know? It's the same deal. Like, boomers are still benefiting from the status quo, so they're not going to make noise to stop it. They're not going to do anything about it. The reason why we're doing something about it is because it's harming us. As a matter of fact, there was this, hang on, let me see here. Oh no, I just revealed my location. Oh well. If any of you want to send me pizza, feel free. Oh, actually, wait, what am I doing? I'm meant to go here. There's a location I want to look up here. Just give me a second. One Montague Terrace. So this was revealed to me by a New York cell, let's say. Hang on. Okay, so it's right there. So this is like a wealthy location. This is like a wealthy white suburb in America. And if you go through it, you'll see a lot of white people with like, and it's almost all white people pretty much, because it's like a wealthy, it's a wealthy community. And you'll see a lot of baby carriages. You'll see a lot of, and they're multimillionaires up here too. Here we are. You'll see a lot of these let's see here. Trying to find actually, you know what? We got to find the park. Brooklyn, here we are. Brooklyn Bridge Pier. No, it was a little closer in. It's right here. What I realized when I was seeing this is these people that are living in this wealthy part of New York, they have large families. They're in these all-white communities. And it kind of made me think of that Richard Spencer clip of, this isn't quite a nice spot. God, some of these buildings are hideous. Holy shit. Look at this ugly brutalist building. Let me see if I can find, I think this is what I'm looking for here. Greenway, yeah, this is what I'm looking for. Greenway Terrace. Oopsie-daisy. And you realize, like, you have all these nice families. And it made me think of that Richard Spencer clip where he talks about how the white nationalist sphere is full of all these manlet incels who think it's over, but it's only over for them. And it made me think of this because these people, the way that they're living, like there's no great replacement for them. You know, like they're living effectively like it's 1960s America in terms of the demographics. You know, and they're wealthy, they're successful, they have like 3 kids. Like this is a guy I know who works in this area, so he'll like go into the houses of these people and he'll like do electrical work for them. And he's saying like they have like multiple kids, they have a lot of money. We're talking multiple millions of dollars. And yeah, here we go. Like life is great for these people. And so it made me realize like a lot of the stuff that we complain about, this, like how it's over for us, you know, the West is falling, whatever, that's only applies to us. You know, it doesn't apply to these people. You know, like these people. Let me actually see if I can find that manlet incels, because it's so funny. I think I saved it somewhere here. Let me see. Well, yeah, but it's true. Like you can enjoy your white ethno state. You just have to have enough money for it. And effectively, what's happening in America is that it's just becoming a question of economics. You know, like you have enough money to avoid that group and live in a community of your own people. Well, if you don't have that much money, it sucks to be you. It's kind of like the way it works. Here we are. I found it. I'm going to pause myself here.
My experience with the alt-right has been to a large degree an experience with incels, and in many ways man-led incels. And I don't really think much good can come from these people who hate the world, are mad at everything, and so on. I think that if we're going to create a movement that's ultimately going to triumph, it's going to be an alpha movement. So, you know, a lot of these man-led incels, they say it's the end of the world, but it's just the end of them.
Yeah, and he's 100% right. Like, this is what applies to us as well, you know? Like, the reason why I care about demographics and I care about nationalism, whatever, is because I don't have this, all right? I don't have any meaningful pathway to get to this. Oh, okay, looks like we got some brown people here. Okay, so it's not 100%, but still, I don't have any pathway to gain this, right? Here's another normal family, whatever. It looks like, actually, it kind of looks like grandparents with their grandkids. This is what I'm saying. Like, and this is in like a libtard part of New York, by the way. Like, these people vote for leftists, right? But the way that they have it set up, I forget exactly how they do it. Like, they have this NIMBY system set up. NIMBY meaning not in my backyard for non-Americans. And it's basically where they will set up housing and other restrictions on building and construction and zoning. Like, they'll use those to keep out certain demographics from being near them. So they're able to sort of sequester themselves in this very wealthy community and be almost completely homogenous, you know? Yeah, they're system believers, but of course they're system believers. Why wouldn't they be? Right, Barry? Like, I get what you're saying. They're just highly functional versions of the system believers, but look at, they've all got kids. They're thin for the most part. They're healthy. I mean, they look fairly healthy, right? And yet our side, if you look at like the typical nationalist sphere, what do you see? You see, like, there is this meme. I wish I had it. I have it saved somewhere, but it's of like a JD Vance lookalike, and he's like, and he has like his big puffy pumpkin head, and he's carrying a brown kid whose name is like Suck Deep or something, and he's like, we need to secure a future for our white race and our white children. By the way, this is my child, Ramjeet, or something. It's so funny because that's how a lot of the nationalists are, you know. It's almost like an economic designator, right? And we should force Jeets into their communities. Listen, I'd love nothing more than to see that. And as a matter of fact, to some extent, that is starting to happen, because there's a lot of these Jeets that have a lot of resources now, you know, that are coming into, like, they're getting green cards, and then they have senior developer roles. Like, there's this mythology that they're all just dumb or whatever, or they're all just frauds and frauding their credentials. But the fact is, if that were the case, then we wouldn't see them, we wouldn't see this continuously going for 30 years now. Okay, like, they're at a minimum, they're able to function at the level of like a median entry-level developer, you know? Like, I'm not saying that they're geniuses by any stretch, But the H-1Bs from India, a lot of them are at least capable of software development at a median American level. The ones that are being brought in to some extent, right? And they'll be able to hoover up the jobs that should be going to Americans, and then they take those incomes and they start moving into these communities, you know. And then what do you do? So I mean, this is also why I think the pressure is on Indians more than other groups. Because, for example, if you're a French elite, you can, like, Paris may be a giant dumpster, but you can live in a very nice, wealthy part of Paris that is sequestered from this. You don't have to worry about it. Like, you can exist like these young ladies here. I think these are actually Chinese. So they got some rice moving in. Maybe this will piss off the white women. I don't know. But if you're part of this wealthy community, you don't have to worry about them. They're not in your hair. You can just ignore them, which is what they do for the most part. When it comes to Indians, they're hitting every sector. I'm noticing leftists becoming more racist. However, they're still going to be very matriarchal. Yeah, that's true. Oh, hang on. Sorry, I think I'm having some connectivity issues here. There we go. Yeah, hopefully another thing that I'm going to do is get a new network card so that my network is better. But yeah, this is from 2014. Some of them are, right? So there is some variation, right, in terms of the years taken. But I think it's still pretty close to reality. Like, I don't think the demographics have changed that much, because the guys that I'm talking to that alerted me to this neighborhood are guys that are working there right now, right? And they're talking about how these people are wealthy, and oh, you're right, that is true. This is kind of old footage, so you know, maybe the demographics have shifted since then. That would be interesting. I'm noticing leftists becoming more racist. However, they are still going to be very matriarchal. That is true. That is true. Like, oftentimes I've seen leftists, and you can actually see this on Reddit. Like, Reddit is the go-to for, like, libtard, highly censored opinions, right? Because they'll censor anything that's too, you know, right sounding. So you can get a good metric on how leftists are framing their point of view in order to stay in the Overton window of leftists. And I see a lot of leftists adopting these like they'll frame things in like a liberal, democratic, feminist way. Like, these Indians that are coming in now, I'm talking mostly of Canadians here, but they'll say, like, these Indians that are coming in, they don't have the same values towards women in terms of treating women. They're aggressive, snuggle aggressive towards women. And usually it's, to be honest with you, it's a meme for the most part. They're actually, like, yeah, they do behave kind of weirdly in a lot of ways. But again, like, there's other groups that behave much worse that they don't care about, right? So it's mostly political motivation. Some of it is like white women don't really find them that attractive, but even then, like, I'm still seeing, like, for example, the Premier of Alberta, who's a conservative, Danielle Smith, she's married to an Indian. So, like, they're willing to, like, women, when they're trying to make political, and men too, they're trying to make political headway by breeding into the immigrant population, hoping that this associates them with the immigrants. Because Pierre Poilievre as well, who's our conservative leader, he's married to a Colombian woman, I think. I suspect these rich people set up foundations to funnel their money into under the guise of supporting woke climate, multicultural, and so forth. Possibly. Well, you know, it's funny. They stopped talking about climate change as soon as it became an issue, like there was a conflict between that and immigration. Like, you don't really hear about climate change anymore. It's all immigration, or it's all anti-racism now. Like, they don't even waste their time on environmentalism. Because there's an argument to be made there, you know? Like, you dump millions of people into Canada. Why are we even doing carbon credits or whatever if we're just massively expanding our carbon footprint by importing millions of Indians? Right? That's massively increasing our carbon footprint way, way far and away to what our carbon credits and taxes on gasoline are preventing, or like green energy shit, right? Yeah. JBI confirmed. Well, this is like, I think status does play a major role in desirability, and it, like, women will fudge categories of desirability based on the status of the group. So if the dominant group is like Indians, I don't think that they'll suddenly become super attractive to. Speaking of which, I think this is a Jita right here. 2 of them. Actually, this one actually looks like she could be quite pretty. Come to think of it, maybe I'm wrong, but sometimes there's some good-looking ones. But like, I do think that if they're considered the high status group in the society, that'll bump their attractiveness up a little bit. Because there will be white women who will be like, well, I mean, it's not really a conscious thing, it's subconscious, but they think, you know, I want my children to be on the winning side. I'm going to side with the incoming dominant group because this gives them higher status. And actually, you know what's funny about this? This is a phenomenon. It's not just an interracial phenomenon. This is a phenomenon you see within Europeans, intra-European phenomenon. If you look at whites that are in the incel community, overwhelmingly the Americans and the other like Anglospheres, like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United States, even the UK, overwhelmingly they're from like Slavic, Eastern European, some other Eastern European background. And their parents came over. So they're like second gen. And that's because the women are much more willing to integrate, like they will choose a less attractive man of the dominant European culture over their own men that are part of the minority culture. And for the men, it's a lot harder to integrate into the normie, like the mainstream, say, white Anglo leaf culture, for example, than for women. Because all the women have to do is just breed into the population. They just have to, like, there's this Polish girl I worked with, and she's quite pretty as well. And this was back when I had that job I was talking about. The job involving customer service. And I remember, like, she was second gen, or no, actually she was first gen, but she came over when she was like 5 or 6, so she didn't have an accent. But I've had her on Facebook for 10 years now. And I remember seeing an update, because I never use Facebook, but I just opened it once. And I saw she's married to this like 6'3", like old money Anglo, who's also good looking. You know, do we see this happen in reverse? And she's not anything special in terms of her own education. She's like, I think she has like a bachelor's in sociology or some shit. You know, like typical like 110 IQ Freud stuff. But she's nice enough, so I'm not even mad at her or whatever. I mean, it's good for her. She was never nasty to me anyways, so I'm not even, but it demonstrates, you compare that to her male counterpart, like that's not going to happen, because like there's, and I've also known cases of like women from European backgrounds, like Eastern European backgrounds, who were married to, and they're both professionals, they're like white collar professionals, her and her husband, and they move over here. And within a year, they'll be divorced, and the woman will marry like a blue collar guy of the local white background. And it's very clear that the reason for this is that they want to integrate into the dominant cultural ethnicity of the population. And as a result, there's a disproportionate number of Inkies of second gen Eastern European background, because their women just breed into the local white population, and the men have a much harder time. So I think that this is a phenomenon you can demonstrate in a lot of different ways. That's the point. So it's not just a race thing. I don't think white women will sleep with winning jeets. They're just going to pagan max and stay with whites. Maybe. I don't know. It doesn't have to be a lot of them, right? It doesn't even have to be many of them. It could even just be like 10-20%. And if you have a below replacement fertility rate, losing like even 15% of your women reproductively compounds. So like I remember doing this math when I was looking at California's demographics. And something like 20 to 25% of white women in California mix out with non-white men, mostly Hispanic men. If you add to that the fertility rate is, let's say the fertility rate is 1.5, okay? If your total fertility rate is 1.5, that means the next generation is going to be 75% the size of the generation that came before it. So it's only going to be 3/4 the size. If you subtract 25% of the fertile women from the next generation of whites because they mix with a non-white man and produce a mixed race kid, you have to subtract those women, and then on top of that you have to do the math again, and you end up with like 50% the size. So you actually lose quite a you can lose your population quite dramatically just with a relatively small amount of mixing if you have a below replacement fertility rate, which all of our countries do pretty much. But we'll have to see. Who knows? We'll have to see. I have seen some interesting stuff coming out of, let me see here. I have seen some like, shit like this.
Fucking care. I don't care what it's called. I hate them. I hate them. I need them off the streets. I need them off the road. I need them off the highway. I need them out of my town. I need them out of my country. Fuck. I'm so sick of them. I'm so.
This is pretty funny, but yeah, wife material, right? It's like average Canadian woman. I don't know. I don't actually know if this is what it was referencing. Like if it actually had anything to do with Indians or if it was something else. But people put that that caption over it. But I have seen some women that have that attitude. So it's kind of funny actually. But so there are a number of women that will have that attitude, and there is also women. Look, we have to be fair. Like any group, you're going to have women that genuinely are, like, for one reason or another, committed to the cause. Like they want to side with, even for like eccentric reasons. They are Europa, the last battle pilled or whatever. Those do exist. But I think the vast bulk of people, men and women, not just women, men and women have this sort of thought process where they're more concerned with who's the highest status and conforming to the high status group in the population. So we'll have to see, though. I'd be quite happy to be proven wrong, but I think like looking at Asian women, how Asian women behave in America, how Latin Americans' societies function, I think this demonstrates that. You know, like I think in my video on women in the political, I talk about how the ideal for women is like a metropolis, like a giant metropolis that's multi-ethnic, that has like a highly stratified status hierarchy system, but even though it's stratified, it's open for women to breed up the status ladder. I think that's like the ideal for women, is this multiracial metropolis where women of any background can breed up into the elite. That seems to be their ideal anyways. I think most white women will not breed at all rather than breeding with a jeet. Actually, I do have to say, I have noticed that when white women do get into interracial relationships, well, actually no. So in some cases, they have a lower fertility rate. So for example, with Asians, including South Asians, they have a lower fertility rate. But then if you look at their white women they get with Hispanic men and white women they get with black men, they have a higher fertility rate than white women they get with white men. Now, I think the reason for that is because of the white women that get with black and Hispanic men are less educated on average. Whereas if you look at the reverse, for example, whether it's white women with white men or it's Hispanic or black women with white men, the Hispanic or black women that get with white men tend to be more educated on average than the median black or Hispanic woman. So who are we talking to? Like Golden Era Boxing. Who are you talking about? Dust and Clay. That sounds like a familiar name. Sounds like I've watched his content before. Is he doing that to dodge the censors or what? Yeah, Javier, you're right. But what's interesting about this is that if we assume whites and Hispanics will breed pretty much without that much interference in the United States, you will see a stratification where, like if you assume that they eventually enmesh completely, you would have you would see the non-Spanish surnames, which would be descended from white men, they would probably have the highest status, but they would be fewer in number. Whereas the overall population, there would be more children descended from Hispanic men and white women in the larger society, but they would occupy lower segments of the society, like the middle class and the lower classes. Whereas the upper class would be, you'd see a concentration of white names in the upper class in that situation. So, and actually, there's, hang on. There's I wanted to respond to this message I got on Discord, but I asked him if I could read it off on the stream, but he didn't get back to me. Maybe I'll read the first part because there's nothing, this is actually something I wanted to address anyways, because I don't think I got my point across as clearly as I wanted to. When I was talking about the black pill being probabilistic. So he writes here, and I won't reveal his name, but he writes, I know you view the BP probabilistically, but I think your view understates the importance of the situations and events that you were talking about. Every situation, especially those involving women, could be reconsidered as what exactly could have been different in that situation to make me come out successful rather than unsuccessful. Whether it's something out of your control, such as height or personality, there's usually a quantifiable factor that could have changed the outcome of the situation. I don't think the formulaic element of the BP can be completely written off in favor of probability, especially since I think many of us would not even be here even if one of those situations had gone right in our lives. So, just to be clear, because I think maybe I wasn't as clear as I wanted to be in how I was describing the BP as probabilistic, I don't mean that it has, using the formula has no value, right? Like, if you're 5'6", you know that you are, just because there is a 0.001% chance that a woman that's 5'8" or taller would be willing to overlook you being shorter than her. Okay, even if there's a 0.001% chance, in theory, that's theoretically possible, but it would be irrational for you to invest all of your mental resources and your energy and efforts into finding a woman that's of that height, right? It doesn't make rational sense. So yes, plugging in your stats and then figuring out what your most likely viable outcome will be, that's important. But I think, again, I can tell you from personal experience, one of the reasons why we created the incel manosphere is because we were seeing too many contradictions to the hard logic of BP. Where we would see, and this is where the concepts like oofy doofy theory came up. where people would invent like, okay, so we can't explain why we see like a looks matched couple, or even like a couple where the woman mogs the man. So we need to come up with an explanation for it. And we can't say it's beta bucks because we know about their personal situation and that money's not involved in this case. So we have to come up with another explanation, oofy doofy theory, where you feel the need to explain away these exceptions. And my point is like, no, probabilistically, like these outcomes still happen just due to the randomness and just sometimes women's whims, regardless of whether the stats are against you or not, even if they're very much against you, and my position is because that probabilistic element exists, you cannot simply completely write yourself off, right? And I think that there is a massive opportunity cost in writing yourself off, because you will end up like sacrificing years that you cannot get back. Because unlike the probabilistic outcome that I'm describing, which again, you can optimize it to the greatest extent possible. You can figure out, okay, what are the best odds for what I should be targeting? Like, I know a guy who's 5'6", and he went for like overweight women and he got some. He was able to date overweight women. It worked for him, okay? And fat women, all right? So he was able to have relationships. You could say that's suboptimal, but it was tolerable for him, even if it wasn't ideal. But that would be an example of optimizing your odds. Like, where is my greatest degree of success going to be in? Right? But the problem is that if you consider something like a number, like, or something that is a hard number, like your age, okay, when you're 20, you have a completely different set of options when it comes to women versus when you're 30, okay? And it's just a fact, okay? And again, I guess you could bring up probability here too. In theory, you could find like a 20-year-old girl who would be okay with you being 30. But most of the time, that's not true. Most of the time, you are going to be confined to within like 5 or so years, maybe 6 or 7 at a stretch of your own age, right? So if you're my age, I would consider realistically like the lowest I could go in terms of age where I wouldn't start seeing my age alone being a major penalty would be like maybe mid-20s, right? And what I fear is that you'll have these guys that will do this formulaic math, and then they will determine that it's over for me, and so they refuse to try. But then they end up losing opportunities that are never there again, right? Whereas, I mean, in theory, if you're like a 4.5, if you set age aside, like you're not going to become less attractive. Just like you're going to always be a 4.5, let's say, unless you become uglier somehow, like you get fatter or whatever. If you just maintain yourself, your odds are not going to decrease. But because of age, your odds will get worse and worse as you get older and older. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is that these certain content creators are creating an environment where a large segment of guys are just giving up, and I don't think that's an intelligent way of doing it. And let me see here. And I basically answered the same thing to him as what I described here. And then this guy sent me another thing. And again, like the reason why I'm reading this off is because it was very well thought out. So I think it's should be given proper consideration. He says there's certainly an opportunity cost. Things can spiral out of control very quickly. Things can and will go very poorly if you are not careful, no matter how you look. I think you need to be a certain type of person mentally fit for it to be worth trying, even if you are an average guy. Well, this is for me saying like there's no real opportunity cost to trying and failing other than like your own personal, like it is like rejection's wounding, right? But it's not like you're materially losing from like going out and interacting with people versus not interacting with people and staying in your room, right? You're not really losing. It's not like there's a huge opportunity cost that you're sacrificing, unless you're spending like a ton of money going to clubs or something, which again is not what I would advocate for. right? Like the way, for example, like the way I'm thinking of it, and knowing my stats, I know that I would probably have higher luck going somewhere like Latin America than I would going to Europe, you know? So it would make sense if I have the resources to migrate. It would be smarter for me to go somewhere like Argentina or whatever than it would be for me to go to Germany or go to Poland, right? And that's sort of the logic that I'm going at. And then, so what he's describing is, and I can sympathize with this because I'm also kind of sensitive to rejection. Actually, I think there's an SNP, genetic trait that's associated with this that increases your rejection sensitivity. I happen to have it. I know this because I know my DNA profile. But, so I know, and like part of the reason why I'm sensitive to this is because I know the coping that I used to justify not doing anything, right? And then it resulted in me like wasting a better part of a decade not trying with women generally. And like I was actually just the other day, I was thinking about this situation I was in where I was getting my hair cut, and this was like 2017 or so. Or no, I think my father was still alive at the time, but he was unwell. So this was probably more like 2015. And this woman was cutting my hair, and she was like really enthusiastic and into me. Now, I remember thinking at the time she's just being nice, but it occurred to me, like, what happens if she was being nice, but maybe she was also interested in me, and if I had like nudged a little further, maybe I could have gotten her phone number and we could have interacted. And then it occurred to me, this was 11 years ago. Like, what happened? And this woman was from like based on her accent and based on her phenotype, I'm guessing she was either Dominican or Puerto Rican. She looked like a mulatto or like something like that, and she had a Spanish accent. So she's either Dominican or Puerto Rican. And it had occurred to me that, like, let's say I'd gotten involved with this woman, and like 11 years down the line, I could have been a father to like a 7 or 8 year old at this point. You know, my entire life could have taken a different turn if this had turned out to be what it is. Now, it's possible that I was misinterpreting it. I had made the assumption at the time that she was just being polite, so I didn't pursue anything further. But I'm saying, like, these are things that you don't realize, like what is significant, how this could completely alter the trajectory of your life. You know, and then you just it occurs to you the opportunities you'll never get back because you've aged out of them. You know. Is it mostly oofy doofy or looks max? Is it LGBTQ? Cross phenotypes? How's the Y's? Are the beds lame? That's a tough one. I'm not really sold on the oofy doofy theory, because the oofy doofy theory is like women want men that are easy to control. So they go after guys that are unattractive because they think they have no options. So they're not going to. Maybe there's something to that. I could see women being like avoiding, because I remember when the OkCupid study came out. You know, the one that showed like women found 80% of men below average in attractiveness. When they actually looked at the response rates of women, women were actually just as likely to message and to reply to men of any attractiveness level as men were. Like even though women rated men as less attractive, they were still willing to message them at rates similar to what men would message women. And the conclusion was, like, they were rating them as unattractive, but they were messaging them for different reasons. Like, maybe, again, this could be oofy doofy theory. And I think that that's an element, but I also, just having known some of these cases personally, I think in a lot of cases it's just right, just be first and just be in the right place at the right time. Like, as I said, I brought up that case a while back of the guy with cerebral palsy that I knew who had 2 different baby mamas somehow. He was able to get 2 different women pregnant. I don't even know how logistically. Like, he was pretty fucked up if you ever saw him. But I even remember his name. His name was Sean Pylon. I'm only saying that because it's a very generic name, so there's going to be like 300 of them if you look them up. But yeah, he just be first is a major thing. There's guys that had just met a girl. Like, I actually grew up with a girl next door type of thing. Like, this girl was attractive. She was like 6.5 out of 10, blonde, blue-eyed, Anglo. Had things gone differently, I could have ended up with her, in theory. Probably not, but I'm just saying, like, that sort of thing does happen. Like, it's not necessarily a hard calculation, because people exist in the world, right? You can, like, people exist in the world and they're presented opportunities throughout their existence in the world. It's not just like a cold calculation that people make. You know, so that's sort of the argument that I'm making, is that, you know, I guess it would be outlier theory in a way, I suppose. But, and, you know, there's another example. Like, there's a guy I know in our circles who's going to university right now. And he's, it's really fucked up. Like, he's dealing with some real BS right now because he's in a dorm, and he tried his best to integrate socially, to become part of, like, the club, I guess you could say. But it just didn't work. They didn't want him around, and, like, the girls weren't interested in him because his stats are just not there, you know. But at a minimum, what he can say is that he actually tried. Okay, even if he tried and failed, he still tried. So at least there's no regret. That's really what I'm getting down to. You don't want to feel regret, because in my case, like, I think back and I feel regret from things that I knew I could have tried. Maybe it wouldn't have worked, but I could have tried it. I didn't do it. And like, that's one of the things about the age pill that really hits you, is regret for the things that you didn't do, and that the doors that close. And I think the romantic doors are much more rigid than other doors, because people will talk about how, like, oh, ageism in the job market and whatever. That does exist to some extent, but really that only starts kicking in when you're properly middle age, right? When it comes to dating, like, you start hitting mini walls at a much earlier age. Like, you start, like, the first mini wall you hit, I think, is your mid-20s. Once you're past your mid-20s, it's not really socially acceptable for you to date girls that are in their early 20s or late teens, right? By late teens, obviously, I mean above legal age, but you know what I mean, like 18 to 25, or 18 to like 23. Once you hit like 28, 29, that starts to become, you start to get issues from the women themselves, right? And then you hit another soft wall, I think, by 35. You lose the mid-20 girls. Like, now you're going to be looking at late 20s to early 30s. Once you hit 40, you're pretty much only going to be looking at girls in their 30s. Probably closer to mid-30s. And by the way, this is something we talked about on with Aibo on the geomaxing stream, the C-maxing stream, is that this applies to C-maxing too. Like, you can't geomax your way out of age barriers, right? Age gaps, where you can, like, date a girl who's 22 and you're like 40 or whatever, and you'll get away with it. Like, you can in places like the Philippines for, you know, monetary reasons, but places like Thailand, if you're mid 40s, you're going to be like, you can date down further than you can in the West, but not by as much as you'd think. Like, you could date women in their 30s if you're in your mid 40s. You're not dating women in their 20s. That's just not going to happen. You know? So the whole point is that you want to try in your 20s as much as you can, because you won't get those opportunities in your 30s. You know, you can, in theory, like, if you bummed around your 20s, you can, in theory, turn that around in your 30s and, like, by your 40s catch up in terms of the job. If the job market works, obviously there's elements of chance to that too. But the point is, like, you can do that, whereas it's pretty much impossible if you're dating. That's the point I'm trying to make. And Wounded Bird Game. Yeah. Well, I mean, women do like drama. So if you can be like mentally ill maxed, that does work. Have a map of North America and show regions color coded to what the dominant dating selection is happening. That'd be interesting to see. I mean, I would assume that the Midwest has a lot more oofy doofies, and the coastal cities, there's a lot more short-term dating. And that's not necessarily because of liberal ideology, by the way. I would say that's more so due to the presence of more elite men. That would be my guess. Elite men, both in terms of income and in terms of looks. Now, obviously, I don't think that men who are attractive or men that are wealthy but not attractive get anything. It's basically just bribery, right? Like it's like glorified escorting. But for physically attractive guys, so that makes a difference. And women will sleep with guys that provide them a certain lifestyle up to a point. They're not going to be attracted to them really, and they'll try and avoid it if they can. But they will sort of do that in some cases. Not all women, but some will. Right. Wonder what the childless available men to women ratio in the Middle Ages. Probably like 20 to 1. Actually, it goes up. The number of single women to men goes up as you get older. Because the divorces happen and men will remarry. If men do remarry and divorce, which most do, they'll remarry a younger woman. Now this could invert or reverse for the later generations. It's hard to say, but for boomers, anyways, that was the pattern that they followed. So you'd have a lot of divorced boomer women and Gen X women to some extent as well that would re-enter the market. This is where like all the cougars came from, right? But of course, that was a sort of short-term phenomenon. Because women, they're sexually attracted to young men the same way men are sexually attracted to young women. But a man can have a romantic attraction to a young woman. A woman really is not romantically attracted to a man that's much younger than her because of the power dynamics that are involved. Like women really want to be perceived as like the younger, more naive, physically smaller member of the relationship. Saint Vez. What really matters in this world if you want to be a good lifer? Is it really just luck plus probability? You have to maximize your odds. You have to put yourself in the ideal situation, which is why I had in my early streams, which I'll put up on Rumble, I did geomaxing streams, because the whole point of the geomaxing streams was not like you just be a degenerate in Southeast Asia or whatever. The point was like put yourself in the most favorable position in terms of the ratio that you can. And then you will be able to pursue a genuinely good life based on that. Like there was a guy in my server who's he worked in construction, he worked in the oil industry in, I believe it was Texas or Alberta, Alaska, excuse me. So one or the other, Texas or Alaska. And he saved a lot of money and he moved over to the Philippines and he married a local woman. He has a daughter, and he's quite happy with his situation, you know? Now, is that for everybody? No. Like, I don't know if I would choose the Philippines. I think the infrastructure and there are other issues that I have with that country. But for him, it was the best solution for his problem, you know, his situation. Thoughts on cult maxing for snuggles. You have to be attractive to start a cult. Like, the closest example we have right now is Airval, and he has enough voids around him personally, but like most of the people that are involved are like dudes, right? They're white dudes, and then they're trying to drag in women from other races because they can't bring in white women. White women can't be bribed to join the cult. So it's not what it used to be. Though I think if you were a white guy, like there are stories in like the 19th century of British or German sailors getting stranded in Papua New Guinea or something, and they would end up becoming a tribal chieftain because the Papuan tribes saw him as like some sort of reincarnation of a god or something because he looked so strange compared to them. So it does happen. Anyways, guys, it's 3 hours in, so I'm going to end the stream now. Thanks for coming along. Yeah, if you want to join my Discord server, just go ahead and join. As I said, I've modified the rules a little bit. If you are somebody who knows somebody in my server and they can vouch for you, you can get in. They just need to vouch for you. Other than that, you have to send a super chat and you get it. So, what would your advice be for Raymond Thoughts in Mind? If I were him, I would move to Latin America. That's what I would do if I were him. Because he has properties that he could live off of. But I don't know. I mean, it's his personal situation. He might not prefer that. So, anyways, guys, I'll talk to you later.